Chapter 1050. The people of Siam were very proud. They felt superior when they saw other people. They had never suffered such humiliation before. Therefore, many people came to the diplomatic mission compound in the morning. They wanted to prove that the rumors were false. They wanted to prove that their country was still strong and dignified. However, when the prisoner carriage came out of the compound, all their hopes were dashed. They saw a man in heavy armor standing in the carriage and parading through the streets. On his neck were the words "Guilty General Tong Si," written in Siamese. This was a blatant slap in the face. All the Siamese who saw this scene clenched their fists tightly to express their unwillingness to accept this. They felt humiliated by their country's humiliation. At this moment, their patriotism began to crumble. Some people could not help but curse. Ma Dali, who was accompanying them, wanted this effect. He glanced at Chun Hong and saw that his expression was ugly. He sneered in his heart. This is just the beginning. There will be more exciting things later. Chun Hong did not know what Ma Dali was thinking. He only hoped that the convoy would leave the city as soon as possible. Then he would bring Ma Dali back to the diplomatic compound to discuss the details of the peace talks. He was even thinking about how to appease the people, how to restore the prestige of the country, and how to unite the people. Suddenly, a loud shout broke his train of thought. A man in a servant's uniform suddenly broke through the guards and rushed to the prison wagon, shouting for his master. The Siamese soldiers in charge of guarding the carriage did not have time to react. Then something unexpected happened. The servant cried out loud, then looked at the prisoner and said, "No, you are not our general. You are not General Tong Si." The first sentence was not very clear, but the second sentence explained everything clearly. Tong Si was a fake. Stop him. Chun Hong, who had a guilty conscience, widened his eyes and cursed in his heart. He hoped that nothing would happen, but something still happened. Ma Dali, who had been waiting for this moment, asked with a dark expression, "What's going on? General Chun, shouldn't you give us an explanation?" Facing Ma Dali's questioning gaze, Ha Chunwang naturally had to deny it. He immediately said in a very firm tone, "It must be a misunderstanding. It must be a misunderstanding. How about this? Leave it to me." Chun Hong had to do something. Otherwise, things would really be messed up. If that really happened, the king might even kill him. After making a promise, Chun Hong rode out from the group and came to the prisoner's carriage. He first yelled at the servant and ordered him to be taken away. At the same time, he said to the surrounding people who were watching the show, "This is General Tong. He attacked our good friend, the 5-star army, without permission. He was punished according to the law. All right, the matter has been clarified. Everyone, don't crowd around here. Go do whatever you need to do." Previously, the rumors that Tong Si had been convicted were all hearsay. Although he was now in the prison van, it was still a mystery as to why he had been arrested. Now that Chun Hong had taken the initiative to explain himself, this was equivalent to an official response. Immediately, the surrounding commoners were unhappy. Tong was the person who had once killed the leader of the 5-star army. At that time, this incident was widely publicized in the royal city. Now that he had lost the battle, he was thrown out as a scapegoat to express goodwill to his former enemy. This kind of government, this kind of country was really disappointing. Why? Didn't General Tong Si attack under the king's order? Yes, otherwise, how could a general take away hundreds of thousands of troops without a decree? This doesn't make sense. Yes, we need a reasonable explanation. General Tong Si is innocent. We shouldn't bow down to the 5-star army. Siam is the most powerful country in the world. All kinds of shouts were different, but the meaning was very similar. It could be seen that the people were still very emotional. There were also some patriots among them. This was the foundation of Siam when it was a big city. With such outstanding people, as long as they didn't do anything that angered the heavens, what couldn't they do? Unfortunately, his good hand was ruined by Chun Hong and the others. If Hamad still had the final say, this wouldn't have happened. This was the role of a person in a powerful country. Otherwise, how could a sheep leading a herd of lions defeat a herd of sheep led by a lion? Alright, this is an order. If anyone dares to question it, they will be arrested and severely punished. Chun Hong, who didn't want to complicate matters, was angry and showed a fierce expression. This fierce expression naturally had an effect on the ordinary people. Immediately, many people shut their mouths. Anyone could see that if they said anything inappropriate at this time, there was a possibility of them being arrested. That would be too unfair. But not everyone was afraid of Chun Hong. For example, Ma Dali, who was prepared, saw that the voices of the people were about to be suppressed and knew that it was time for him to stand up. He sneered in his heart and rode forward. General Chun, I have a question. Please bring that servant over. I have something to ask. Seeing that it was Ma Dali, Chun Hong immediately smiled and said, Minister Ma, you don't have to worry about such a small matter. I can handle it. It's not a problem of whether you can handle it or not. I know that you intend to protect General Tong Si. In such a mood, perhaps you can really get a fake person to fool us. Therefore, we have to verify the person's identity. Otherwise, we will become the joke of the five-star army, Ma Dali said seriously. The five-star army was now waiting for Tong Si's arrival, and time was limited. If Chun Hong couldn't convince Ma Dali, he couldn't be sent to the five-star army. The war had to continue, and Chun Hong couldn't bear such a big responsibility. Helplessly, he waved his hand and asked the servant who was about to be brought back. When the servant was brought back, he looked at Ma Dali in horror. Then Ma Dali said, What did you say just now? You said that this isn't General Tong Si, right? This. I might have seen wrongly. The servant seemed to know that he had made a big mistake. At this moment his voice was trembling. Don't be afraid. Just tell the truth. I can guarantee that if you tell the truth, no one will make things difficult for you. Not only that, I will also keep you by my side to protect your safety. How about it? Can you tell the truth this time? Ma Dali made a promise in front of everyone. Ma Dali's intention to protect him was very sincere. At this moment, the servant seemed to have let go of all his worries. First, he raised his head and looked at the person on the prisoner's carriage. Then he pointed at the person and said, I'm General Tong's servant. Of course, I recognize our general. However, this person is really not our general. Are you sure? Ma Dali suddenly raised his voice. I'm sure. The servant also said with a look of desperation. Perhaps he also knew that his life and safety had fallen into Ma Dali's hands. If he didn't tell the truth, only death would await him. He had no other choice. Humph. Ma Dali's cold snort reached Chun Huang's ears. His face immediately turned ugly. General Chun, I think I need an explanation. Explain your numbness. Chun Hong really wanted to say this, but he didn't dare. Right now he was at Ma Dali's mercy. What could he say when he was at a disadvantage? Fortunately, his reaction was fast enough. He quickly raised the horsewhip in his hand and lashed out at a guard beside him. He shouted, Speak. Who gave you the courage to give this general a fake to fool me and the noble envoy? Did you eat a bear's heart or a leopard's gall? All right, the scapegoat had been randomly picked. The matter was resolved immediately. Ma Dali and the others returned to the diplomatic mission's courtyard. At the same time, the servant from Tong's residence also returned with them. Presumably, with this person around, Chun Hong couldn't find a random person to fool him. Chun Hong went to the palace with a constipated expression. He didn't know what to do now that he had messed up his mission. However, the expected thunderous rage didn't happen. Perhaps the king also knew that after locking Xianghua in the dungeon and torturing him, he had no choice but to continue using this general. Furthermore, he knew about this matter. There was no way that he was being lied to. Post a notice and put Tong on the wanted list. Search every place and person related to Xianghua. Reward him heavily. I don't believe that a living person can fly to the sky, right? Ili Chi had dug into a dead end and directly linked Tong Si's disappearance to Prime Minister Hammond. Reality proved that if the method wasn't correct, the results wouldn't be correct. 5 days passed quickly. Under Yang Chendong's premeditated plan, the army continued to advancing towards Bangkok. Along the way, the foreign soldiers who had been baptized in the battlefield went through fierce battles again and again. After 150,000 casualties, there were only 100,000 left. However, these 100,000 soldiers definitely had the combat strength of a B-grade army. Another 20,000 soldiers were sacrificed in exchange for the defeat of the Siamese East Army. Of the original 250,000 soldiers, apart from those who were killed or captured, 20,000 managed to escape back to Bangkok. Behind them was the main force of Yang Chendong's 5-star army, which consisted of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The victory of the North Army was finally decided. Under the command of the Second Army Luo Pe, the public security chief Long Tainan, and the Lao general He Guang, they engaged in a huge battle with the Siamese army's General Godin. Chapter 1051. Gordon lived up to his name as a general of the Siam army. Not only was he brave, but he was also good at commanding. At one point, he brought a lot of pressure and threat to the 5-star army. However, just when both sides were evenly matched, 2nd Master Lu and 6th Master Lu, the two firearm engineers, made their move. The cannons opened up a path and the muskets attacked. Once again, they showed the world the difference between muskets and cold weapons. Faced with the sudden attack of the two elite Cold Vanguard Division, Gordon could do nothing but watch helplessly as they stabbed at him like two sharp knives. However, he didn't choose to run away like the other generals who were enemies of the 5-star army. Instead, he chose to sacrifice himself on the battlefield. He led his personal soldiers to charge at the Cold Vanguard Division. In the end, his blood was spilled on the battlefield, and he truly fulfilled the saying that generals should die on the battlefield. When the news of Prime Minister Hammond being imprisoned came, perhaps Gordon knew that he had no way out. If he lost the battle and returned to the capital, with the jealousy of Chun Hong, he might not have a good ending. He might even implicate his family. Since that was the case, he might as well die on the battlefield. At least he could preserve his reputation and protect his family. Gordon shed blood on the battlefield and died heroically for his country. Once the news spread, the North Army was in chaos. Without a commander, they could only retreat in the face of the 5-star army. Not long after, Chiang Mai and Dongchi were conquered. In the end, only 50,000 of the 300,000 soldiers escaped back to Bangkok. While the East and North launched a fierce counterattack, the two divisions of the First Sea Army in the south re-surrounded the important city of Pattaya. With the help of artillery, they quickly breached the city. The second-ranked general of the Siamese army, Nayu, died in battle. The other second-ranked general, Mengwa, fled back to Bangkok with 10,000 soldiers. At this point, the capital was in an awkward situation of being surrounded on three sides. In Bangkok, 80,000 defeated soldiers gathered. In addition to the original 100,000 elites and 200,000 new recruits, there were close to 400,000 soldiers. Just in terms of numbers, they exceeded the 5-star army's 250,000 soldiers. The East Army had 125,000 soldiers, the North Army had close to 100,000, and the South Army had less than 20,000. The Siamese army only had a numerical advantage. In terms of morale, the Siamese army was a mess. Actually, when Chun Hong betrayed Tong Si and asked for peace with the 5-star army, the morale of the army and the people had already started to crumble. The pitiful king of Italy didn't think about how to salvage the situation. Instead, he offered a huge reward and made it so that everyone knew about it. This only accelerated the time and process of their defeat. If one's heart was broken, it would be useless no matter how much effort they put in. Siam, which was originally a powerful country, went from glory to destruction in just half a year. Siam's territory was too small, and there was limited space to maneuver. Another reason was that the 5-star army's strategy was correct. After discovering the strength of the opponent, Yang Chendong naturally changed his strategy. Using battle to nurture the army was undoubtedly the right move. Then he grabbed hold of the opponent's weakness and used a person who had been forgotten by the opponent to attack the opponent, thus causing the opponent to lose the morale of the army. Now, it seemed that it was also an excellent move. Of course, having a pig like Chun Hong as an opponent would also help things progress smoothly. Siam capital, Bangkok. The 8 gates that led to the outside world were all closed. The outer and inner city gates were filled with Siam soldiers. From afar, it was a patch of black. However, when one got closer, it was not hard to see the worry in their eyes. Siam had 800,000 regular soldiers and 200,000 reserve soldiers. However, in just over half a year, more than half of them had been killed or injured. There were only less than 400,000 soldiers left. One could imagine how they would feel if they were to go deep into the enemy's territory. Ha Chunwang was once again entrusted with a heavy responsibility. He became the great general of the city defense, and Menghua, who had escaped from the south, became the deputy general of the city defense. The two of them commanded an army of 380,000, but there was not the slightest bit of joy on their faces. General Meng, what do you think? On top of the city wall, Ha Chunwang, who was dressed in heavy armor, looked down at the 5-star army. His eyes couldn't help but twitch. He had a feeling that if the other party really decided to attack the city, with those advanced cannons and guns, they wouldn't be able to stop them. Menghua was a standard 7 feet tall man. He also had a certain level of talent in leading troops. Unfortunately, he was born at the wrong time. How could his sword be a match for cannons and guns? Now that he was asked by Ha Chunwang, he only hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. He spat out 3 words with difficulty. We can't defend it. That's right, we can't defend it. Although there are 380,000 soldiers in the city, there are still 600,000 civilians. The daily expenditure is huge. Now that the people are in chaos, once the siege starts, no one knows what will happen. Since that is the case, why don't we negotiate while we still have the strength? He seemed to be talking to himself, but also seemed to be talking to Menghua. In short, he was not prepared to continue fighting. He was prepared to negotiate, and he hoped that Menghua would take the initiative to take on this task. Menghua was a smart man. Apart from his own efforts, there was also a benefactor who appreciated him. That was the captured Prime Minister Hammond. Now that the benefactor was in trouble, it was already a miracle that he was not implicated. How could he still dare to bargain? This general is willing to cooperate with the great general's orders. Ah, good. I didn't misjudge you. Then I'll leave the task of negotiating outside the city to you. Of course, I will also negotiate with the 5-star army's diplomatic group inside the city. Let's work together to turn the tide. What do you think? Seeing Meng was so sincere, Chun Hong was naturally happy. Amidst his happiness, the twitching of the corner of his eyes showed his killing intent. Menghua was someone recommended by the Prime Minister. He would not put such a person in an important position. On the contrary, he would only find an opportunity to kill him. As long as the negotiation task was not completed, he would have a reason to act. Perhaps it was because of this that Menghua was so tactful. Even though he knew that the chances of negotiating were slim, he still wanted to try. What happened next was a tragedy. Menghua led a group of over 100 people out of Bangkok to the 5-star army's barracks, and was successfully instigated to defect. The person who acted was Beta Persei, who had always been by Yang Chendong's side. According to the young master's plan, he first helped Menghua analyze the situation, especially standing in Menghua's position, and talking about many things that might happen in the future. Then he promised that as long as Menghua was willing to surrender, not only would he be able to become a general of Siam in the future, even his noble Prime Minister Hamad, who was locked in prison, would be able to become the deputy governor of Siam. Smart people naturally knew how to choose, and Beta Persei was so considerate of him. Menghua, who was already at the end of his rope, had no other choice. Thus, after staying in the 5-star army's barracks for 5 days, he returned to Bangkok. He only said that the other party disliked his position and needed someone more powerful to negotiate. Then he returned to his post. Menghua actually came back alive, which was somewhat beyond Chun Hawang's expectations. After knowing the 5-star army's attitude, he was completely terrified. In short, he did not have the courage to go to the 5-star army's barracks to negotiate. Previously, he had lied to them about Tong Si, so what could he say now? The 5-star army's siege was still ongoing, and it was only a real siege. They did not intend to attack. After the initial fear, Ha Chunwang became lively again. He made a public statement that although the 5-star army was strong, but facing the 400,000-strong army of Bangkok, they did not have the strength to deal with it. Therefore, there was no need for everyone to panic. As long as time passed, the surrounding countries and factions would definitely step in, and the matter would be resolved. When Ha Chuanwang's words spread out, it did indeed give the panicked hearts of the people in the city a dose of tranquilizer. Everyone was no longer so afraid. However, the streets began to become chaotic, especially the food in the grain stores, which doubled. There was no other way. No one knew how long this siege would last. Food was the most important thing to the people, so they had to prepare more food. This kind of behavior quickly made Bangkok fall into an extremely awkward situation. No one actually attacked the city, and it was chaotic internally. This really made people not know what to say. Yang Chendong did not have anything to say. His attention was now split between MLL Island in the south and Yunnan in the north. The siege of MLL Island had lasted for more than half a year. The so-called king of Dafei, Abu Bakr, had also been trapped in the capital for half a year. After a long siege, the internal chaos had become prominent. It was only a matter of time before they were captured. However, the changes in Yunnan in the north were somewhat unexpected. Under the pincer attack of Nanming and Shiping King, Zhu Huichen finally could not hold on. Then he did something that many people did not expect. He actually contacted the Bangla Kingdom and asked them to send troops to help him attack Shiping King's troops. He also promised that all the captured territory and population would be handed over to the other party, and he would not receive any benefits. In order to survive, Zhu Huichen did not hesitate to betray the interests of his ancestors, and even the dignity of the Han people. Such a good thing made the Bangla Kingdom tempted. As the saying goes, if you don't take advantage of benefits, you are a bastard. They really sent out a general, Rajiv, to lead 100,000 troops through the barren mountains and entered the strategic town behind Yunnan to launch a fierce attack. As soon as 100,000 Bangla people appeared, Shiping King Mu Bin was caught off guard. Without any preparation, he repeatedly lost Jiangtu City, Manmo City, and other strategic towns. After losing Mengding City, Mu Bin had no choice but to lead his troops to fight. Zhu Huichen took this opportunity to counterattack. Shiping King's army was defeated. They abandoned their base in Kunming City and fled to Kelisai. Then letters of request for help were sent to Nanming and the Five-Star Army. Chapter 1052. After receiving the news, Yang Chendong looked at the contents of the telegram, his eyes filled with rage. This is seeking death. He admitted that the appearance of this little butterfly had changed many things, but there was one thing that had not changed, and that was the status of the Han people. Not only did it not fall, but it was also rising. Looking at the Han people under Yang Xia, which one of them did not live with dignity? Which one of them was not proud of their identity as Han people? It was to the point that who knew how many outstanding people from other races wanted to join this group. Regardless of Yang Chendong's attitude towards the Ming dynasty, there was no need to say anything about his attitude towards the Han people. He thought of ways to obtain benefits for them, raise their dignity and change their lives. Seeing that the results were getting better and better, as the descendant of old Zhu Huiping had indeed led the wolf into the house. Just this alone, who knew how many Han people would have no home to return to, who knew how many Han people would have no food to eat, leading to death. Yang Chendong, who attached great importance to the Han people, very quickly gave the order to have the 7th Division, the Heavenly Strategy Division, who was left behind in Yunnan Province, immediately rushed to Langshan and advance 100 li forward to receive all the Han people who had no home to return to due to the chaos of war. He also requested the provinces to take out a portion of the surplus food and send it to the 7th Division to ensure that none of the Han people who rushed over would have problems due to hunger. Under such a decision, who knew how much money and resources would be wasted, but Yang Chendong still did it without hesitation. A person living in this world had to have some goals, some perseverance, so what if he had to pay a price for it? Yang Chendong's words were orders, and they had to be completed without any hesitation. Immediately after the telegram was sent out, the provinces began to move. Telegram to Madali Minghua and the relevant intelligence personnel hidden in the city. I will only give them 5 days. After 5 days, we will launch an attack on Bangkok. Yang Chendong did not want to wait any longer. Based on the current situation, the besieged Bangkok would collapse in at most half a year due to the lack of food. However, the unexpected appearance of the Bangladeshi soldiers had ruined his plan. and he could not continue to wait. Within Bangkok, Mengwa was currently standing in the air in his own courtyard. It had been a few days since Mengwa had returned to the city. Other than reporting the progress of the peace talks, he had been cooped up in the house and had not gone out. He knew very well that he was in the way of some people because he held military power. This time, it was obvious that they wanted to kill him with a borrowed knife and punish him for his crime. Fortunately, the 5-star army didn't want to make things difficult for him. After keeping him for no use, they let him go. Then he found an excuse to get away with it. However, this didn't mean that he was fine. On the contrary, if he didn't know how to restrain himself, he was afraid that there would be bigger problems coming for him. For this reason, he decided to give up his power and stay in seclusion. This way, some people should be able to let go. He had been busy all this while. Naturally, he was not used to stopping abruptly. However, what made Mengwa even more dissatisfied was that the streets were too chaotic. Even if he stayed in the courtyard, he could still feel it. He heard from the servants that due to the city gates being sealed, the prices of goods were constantly rising. Some poor people could no longer afford to live, and there were even cases of robbery on the streets. This was why it was so chaotic. There are so many soldiers in the city. Don't they care? Hearing this answer, Mengwa's face was full of disbelief. He couldn't understand. With nearly 400,000 Siamese soldiers in the city, how could they cause such chaos? Soldiers? Many of the robbers are actually soldiers in disguise, the servant said with a snort of contempt. Mengwa's face immediately turned ugly. He almost forgot that soldiers were not treated well. It was a time of war. How many rich families were willing to send their children to join the army? In order to survive, they had no choice but to do so. When he thought about how even soldiers were robbing on the streets, Mengwa could imagine how chaotic the city was. From this, he was even more certain that surrendering to the 5-star army was the right choice. At least, if they wanted to solve this chaos, only they could do it. His mentality had changed. When Yang Chendong's order was secretly sent to his residence by the CIA, Mengwa decided to cooperate with him. This was also for the sake of fewer Siamese civilians. After all, he couldn't see any hope in the current Siamese government. Remember, the 5-star army will attack the South Gate tonight. When you hear the sound of cannons, it's time for you to take action. After the messenger reminded him, he walked out as a delivery man. Looking at the messenger's back, Mengwa's heart was filled with emotions. Since the beginning of the war, Bangkok had been searching for dangerous people in the city. More than half a year had passed, and these people were still in the city. If it was just luck, it wouldn't be reasonable. The most likely explanation was that they had paid for everything. When did Siamese become so decadent? This made it even more impossible for people to see the existence of hope. When Mengwa received the order, General Chun Hong also received an invitation from Ma Dali. Ma Dali wanted to invite him over for a meal to discuss the future. Although there were emissaries from the 5-star army who came with Mengwa, Ma Dali was still the main force in the negotiations. Chun Hong didn't dare to neglect his request. He immediately brought 30 soldiers and rushed to the diplomatic compound. In his opinion, Bangkok was still the capital of Siamese. It was still his territory. No one would dare to make a move on him. However, he soon realized that he was wrong. What he didn't expect was that Ma Dali had a platoon of guards by his side. It was only because they were well protected that no one was able to see through them. This platoon could play a role in turning the situation around at a critical moment. The sun set and the moon rose. A day of darkness was about to arrive. Mengwa donned the armor of a general and summoned 50 soldiers in his residence. He was ready for action. Boom! As the night fell, the sound of cannons came as expected. This was the first time that the 5-star army had fired the cannons since they besieged the city. It scared the unprepared soldiers and civilians in the city. For a moment, the streets were filled with shouts. Fortunately, there was a curfew in Bangkok. Otherwise, he couldn't imagine what would happen if so many people were running around on the streets. The cannons finally sounded. Mengwa led 50 soldiers out of his residence and headed straight for the dungeon. The first thing he wanted to do was to rescue Prime Minister Hamad. This was also the condition of surrender that Mengwa had proposed. Yang Chendong had readily agreed to it. Meng Wu led his soldiers out of the residence. This news was quickly discovered by the Siamese spies in charge of keeping an eye on the area. The news was then spread. General Meng Wu was naturally unaware of all this. Now that he had decided to take action, he couldn't care less. With his identity as the deputy general guarding the royal capital, Meng Wu entered the dungeon without much effort. He saw Prime Minister Hamad locked up in the innermost cell. At this moment, Hamad didn't have the slightest demeanor of a prime minister. His hair was disheveled and his body reeked of a foul stench. He wasn't much better than a beggar on the streets. However, his eyes were still very bright. When he saw Meng Wu leading a group of soldiers in front of him and breaking the lock on the cell, he sighed and said, "Sigh, why bother? Prime Minister, it's not that I didn't do it because I knew the law. You have been wronged. Tongxi's matter was clearly done by a despicable person. The king was also worried that your achievements would shock the emperor. That's why he took the blame." Meng Wu said with tears in his eyes. "But you?" Hamad seemed to want to say something, but he quickly shook his head and asked, "Tell me, what's the situation outside?" "Prime Minister, the 5-star army has already surrounded the royal capital. The royal capital could be breached at any moment. Due to the jealousy of Chun Hong, I was sent to negotiate with the 5-star army a few days ago. I almost lost my life and surrendered to them." When he said the last sentence, Meng Wu lowered his head. After all, no matter the reason, surrendering to the enemy wasn't something to be proud of. He was really afraid that Prime Minister would reprimand him. Hearing that a general was sent to negotiate, an indescribable anger flashed across Hamad's face. He then sighed and said, "Forget it. If that's the case, I'm afraid that the fate of Siam will come to an end. No one can reverse it. Prime Minister, the 5-star army has already agreed. After breaching the royal capital, you will be the deputy governor here. I will be the general here. As long as we care for the people of Siam, we can still do many things for them." Without the storm that he imagined, Meng Wu raised his head and said with a hopeful expression, "Ha ha." Before Prime Minister could reply, a burst of laughter sounded behind him. A group of 200 people suddenly appeared. The one at the front was a dark-skinned man. After he laughed, he said, "You really betrayed Siam. If that's the case, then prepare to die." "Captain Lick?" Meng Wu turned his head. When he saw who it was, his face was filled with shock. Lick was the captain of Ha Chuanwang's guards and was deeply trusted. Although his rank was slightly low, in Siam where Gordon and the other generals died, he was already considered a famous general. Since he appeared here, needless to say, it must be Hamad's order. With the appearance of Lick, a battle to the death was unavoidable. Looking at the 50 personal guards who had come with him, and then seeing that there were 200 opponents, Meng Wu only hesitated for a moment before he drew his sword. He looked at the other party and said, "Since that's the case, there's no point in saying anything more. Let me see your skills. Kill. Kill." More than 200 people began to fight each other. The clashing sounds of swords and sabers rang out incessantly as they fought in the small dungeon. The soldiers that followed Meng Wu were not only loyal, they were also more skilled than normal soldiers. If it was on the battlefield, it wouldn't be difficult for 50 of them to fight 200 people. However, Lick was not to be trifled with. The 200 people that he brought this time were also veterans of the battlefield. They had the ability to fight 1 against 2. Although they were weaker than the soldiers on the other side, they had the advantage in numbers. When it came to a fight, their advantage was very obvious. Chapter 1053. With 4 against 1, it didn't take long for over 20 of Meng Wu's personal guards to die. Moreover, they were constantly forced to retreat. If this continued, they probably wouldn't be able to save Xianghua, and Meng Wu would also die here. However, all of this changed with the sound of arrows being shot. A group of about 50 men in black suddenly charged out. They were all dressed in black and had black masks covering their faces. They held small crossbows in their hands. With just one wave of attack, they killed dozens of Siamese soldiers and opened up a bloody path for the Siamese soldiers. Using this opportunity, Meng Wu led the remaining soldiers out and met up with the men in black. It was also at this moment that Meng Wu saw clearly that the leader of the black cloth group was actually a woman. Although he couldn't see her face clearly due to the black cloth covering her face, he could still make an accurate judgment based on her figure and voice. General Meng Wu, we are here on the orders of the 6th young master to receive you. Leave this place to us. Go to the east gate first and open the gate. Right, this is for you. It will help you. The woman in the lead was the person in charge of Bangkok, Qingxi. As she spoke, she placed a sword in Meng Wu's hand. This is Chun Huang's sword? Meng Wu was shocked when he saw the sword in his hand. That's right. Chun Hong has been placed under house arrest by us. You are now the highest ranking officer in the army. Go do what you should do. Qingxi nodded, and then gave the order to the dozens of men in black behind her to kill the enemy. These were all brothers of the CIA's operations team. Before joining, they had all received secret training. In terms of skills, they might not be as good as the Lung brothers, but they were not far off. With the 3-on-3 battle formation, they were confident in dealing with 100 Siamese soldiers. Meng Wu took the sword and looked back at Xiang Guahamad, who had been rescued. He nodded lightly and left with his 4 soldiers. After leaving the dungeon, he rode straight to the east gate. At this moment in Bangkok, cannons were fired from time to time. The soldiers patrolling the streets mostly hid in places they thought were safe. Meng Wu led the 4 riders all the way to the east gate, where they saw thousands of Siamese soldiers standing guard. I was appointed by General Ha Chunwang to open the city gates. Anyone who tries to stop me will be killed. Raising the sword in his hand high up, Meng Wu's shout rang out, causing many of the soldiers guarding the city to be dumbfounded. What the hell was this about opening the city gates? Don't tell me there's no need to continue guarding? A young Siamese general stepped forward and expressed his doubts. Meng Wu did not kill him. After all, the man in front of him was a Siamese soldier. He explained, General Ha Chunwang has received the king's permission to open the gate and surrender. Now all we need to do is to open the gate. This way, we can avoid dying in the war. I see. After hearing this, the young Siamese general nodded in agreement. Most of the soldiers did not have the confidence to defend a lone city. Although there were many who were not afraid of death, no one wanted to sacrifice their lives for nothing. Now that there was an order from above, no one would defend the city gates. The thick gate slowly opened from the inside. The 5-star army, who had already reached the city gates in the dark, surged forward. The one at the front was the 5th Lu Division. They all held powerful firearms to open the way. The 6th young master's order was that if there was any danger, they could fire on their own. However, there were no gunshots. With Meng Wu around, the soldiers had already given up on resisting. The 5th Lu Division quickly took over the duty of guarding the city gates. Behind them were the brothers of the 1st Cavalry Division. With Division Commander Tian Hu in the lead, the mighty cavalry entered the city. Then, according to the plan, they charged straight for the capital of Bangkok. Following closely behind was the new army's 1st Cavalry Division. After Division Commander Lu Zhua and Meng Wu met up, they headed towards the northern city gate. They were going to open it up like before, and lead the Northern Army's 5-star army into the city. In the diplomatic compound, General Ha Chunwang looked at the sword on his neck with a hopeless expression. Then he looked bitterly at Ma Dali and said, Commander Ma, do you think that by kidnapping me, the 5-star army will be able to enter the city smoothly? Ha Chunwang had only brought 30 soldiers to the compound to express his sincerity. He did not expect that the other party would actually dare to make a move on him. Now he had failed in his own territory. What do you think? Ma Dali answered calmly. He even had the opportunity to take a sip of tea. He looked very confident. A platoon of Lung Feng suddenly attacked and caught Ha Chunwang off guard. The 30 guards he brought with him were either killed or injured. He himself was also subdued, and his sword was taken away. In the face of this sudden turn of events, he was naturally stunned. However, he knew that this time there was nothing he could do. Without him as the commander, if the 5-star army really launched an attack, how would he deal with it? Ha Chunwang did not know that the 5-star army had already entered the city. The east and north gates opened without shedding a drop of blood. Faced with the 5-star army entering the city, the streets were already in chaos. Some of the Siamese soldiers resisted on their own without orders. However, most of the soldiers retreated to their barracks. Without orders, they did not know whether they should resist or not. They simply retreated to their barracks and waited for orders. The 1st Cavalry Division that had slaughtered their way into the inner city was like an unstoppable sword. Along the way, anyone who stood in their way was quickly eliminated. In less than 2 hours, they had arrived at the palace. At this moment, facing the sudden arrival of the 5-star army, the palace was already in chaos. The 5,000 palace guards who were left behind to guard the palace started a desperate resistance. At the same time, they sent out a call for reinforcements, hoping that reinforcements would arrive before the cavalry breached the palace. However, it was useless. How powerful was the 1st Cavalry Division? When faced with pure cold weapons, even Lung Feng was no match for them. Not to mention the palace guards who were used to living in luxury and were used to being superior. These people were arrogant. It was useful to scare ordinary soldiers. However, when faced with the elite 5-star army cavalry who were used to life and death, they did not even take an hour. After throwing nearly 2,000 corpses, they completely collapsed. Some fled and some surrendered. The king of Siam, Li Qi, was sitting in the main hall in his royal attire. Beside him stood hundreds of palace guards. However, at this moment, their faces were filled with fear. Obviously, these people knew what they were about to face and were already terrified. However, Li Qi's expression was calm. After all, he was the king who had founded the glorious era of the great city. He was still very courageous. He even once thought that the glory of Siam was about to arrive. As the king, he had a bright future. However, he had no choice but to meet the 5-star army. The sudden appearance of this army destroyed his original plans for the country and for his life. If the king had read about the 3 kingdoms, he would have immediately thought of He Shengdong's idea. The moment the cannons roared above the capital, he had a bad feeling in his heart. His intuition told him that the 5-star army was about to attack the city. He immediately ordered someone to look for Chun Hong, to discuss the upcoming battle of defending the city. Unfortunately, he did not find him. Not long after, news came that the city gate had been breached and the 5-star army had entered the city. When he first heard the news, Li Qi almost fell from his throne. He knew that everything was over. The 5-star army had entered the city without shedding any blood. He was afraid that he would be in danger soon. He immediately gave the order to summon more troops to protect the palace. However, at this moment, he realized that the commander's seal was not in his hands. He could only blame himself for trusting Chun Hong too much. He was afraid that Chun Hong would not be able to command the troops and handed over the commander's seal. Now he did not have the commander's seal. Mobilizing the troops was just a thought. What happened next was very clear. The vanguard cavalry of the 5-star army had arrived. The 5,000 palace guards were defeated in less than an hour. As the king, Li Qi knew that the situation had changed. However, he did not want to throw away his dignity as the king of the country. Thus, he brought over 100 guards to guard the palace. At this moment, he still had a glimmer of hope. That was that the troops that came to save the king could arrive. When that time came, with the advantage in numbers, he might be able to fight against the 5-star army. As long as he could hold on for long enough, the other countries that did not like the 5-star army or did not want to see the 5-star army grow stronger would take action. When that time came, there might be a chance of victory. Li Qi, who had hope in his heart, saw the 5-star army in front of him. He knew that the situation had changed. In the end, all thoughts were just thoughts. You must be the king of Siam. If you surrender now, you can still live. Your guards can also be spared from death. Tian Hu walked in with 2 swords in his hands. He looked at Li Qi, who was still sitting on the throne, and said loudly. Li Qi was not moved by Tian Hu's persuasion. He wanted to continue resisting. Perhaps the longer he held on, the more chances he would have. Since Li Qi did not surrender, Tian Hu did not hold back. He knew that there were close to 400,000 Siamese soldiers in the city. If he did not seize the moment, there might be a change in the situation. A ruthless look flashed across his eyes. He pointed to the opposite side and said, "Archers, get ready. Other than the king, kill everyone else." Chapter 1054. In terms of archery, if the 1st Cavalry Division said that they were the 2nd, then no one would dare to say that they were the 1st. They were able to hit their target 9 times out of 10 when they were riding on a bumpy horse, not to mention when there was no interference. Now thousands of arrows were released at the same time. After just one round of arrows, less than 20 of the 100 or so palace guards were left standing. Li Qi, who was sitting there, was not threatened by the arrows, but at this moment he was still scared to the point that his face turned pale. He was a famous king, and he had also created a prosperous era, but after all, he had not experienced the killing on the battlefield. When he really faced death, he was still afraid. Don't shoot anymore, this king surrenders. Finally, he could not stand the threat and surrendered. With this shout, the seemingly powerful Siam immediately collapsed, becoming a stepping stone for the 5-star army to continue to rise. The long night finally passed, and the moment the sky slowly brightened, more 5-star army entered the city. Until noon, with the King Li Qi's declaration of surrender, and the 1st grade General Ha Chunwang took out the commander's seal to command the army, Siam immediately became a record in history. Yang Chendong followed the army into the city. This time, he took the risk to enter the city with the speed of lightning. Every step of the plan was very crucial. It could be said that if there was a problem at any step, it would lead to a confrontation between the two armies. If that was the case, he did not know how many days it would take, and how many people would have to die to capture Bangkok. Fortunately, all the plans were implemented smoothly, and in the end he still won. As soon as he entered the city, Yang Chendong met the former Prime Minister Hamad and General Meng Hua in the palace. They would also be important talents who would help him manage and rule Siam in the future. In front of everyone, he first changed the name of Siam to Thailand Province, and then appointed a person named Zhang Zhao as the governor of Thailand. This management talent, who had worked in the Chichen city for more than 4 years, was finally released and became a real power manager. As soon as possible, restore the power of the people, restore the economy, and the migration of the population. I will ask you to do it. I hope that the next time this prince comes, this place will have changed greatly, and I will be able to see sincere and satisfied smiles on the people's faces. After stating his wishes, Yang Chendong arranged for people to send Li Qi to Crimson Nest City. He would become another king who was under house arrest there. He was not the first, nor would he be the last. The next day, Yang Chendong led the 1st Cavalry Division, and the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 1st Army to the Liangshan area in the north. In his heart, he was more concerned about his Han brothers. Before he left, he also gave a certain explanation about the Thailand province and the Daf country. The 1st Sea Division went to the Daf country and surrounded the Daf country's capital with the 3rd Sea Division. The 2nd Sea Division wandered around the Gulf of Thailand to declare the sovereignty of this place and not allow any forces to enter and invade. The 2nd Army Commander Luo temporarily stayed in the Thailand province, together with a coalition of 100,000 foreigners. They were responsible for the security, defense, and the task of reorganizing the 380,000 Siam army. The 6th Division went north to Laos province and cooperated with the governor, Luan Shaochen, to continue to be responsible for the suppression and deterrence of the Awol dynasty. The remaining 100,000 foreigners continued to go north and followed Yang Chendong to the Liangshan area. They were responsible for the possible battle there against Nanming King Zhu Huaiqiu and the Bengal army. If there was time, Yang Chendong certainly did not want to run around. He would first stay in the newly established Thailand province for a while to stabilize the situation here. Now it was November. After a month, he would return to Crimson City before the end of the year and celebrate the new year with his wives. Especially since the first Madame, Hu Yen, was pregnant and needed him to comfort her. Time waits for no man. The southern Ming matter concerned the safety of too many Han people. He had to rush there and deal with any problems that could happen at any time. The truth was just as Yang Chendong expected. The southern Ming matter was indeed changing. After King Mubin of Shiping was pincered from 2 sides and was forced to retreat to the Kelisai region, King Nanming's army joined up with the Bengal army from the east. With their combined forces, their forces began to grow. Just in Yunnan alone, the self-proclaimed King Nanming, the second brother of Zhu Huichen, King Guangtong, Zhu Huichen, had recruited 150,000 soldiers. After absorbing the remaining soldiers left behind by King Mubin of Shiping, in addition to the 50,000 soldiers he had brought with him, his army instantly expanded to 200,000. Along with the 100,000 Bengal army that Rajiv of Bangra had brought, the total number of soldiers reached 300,000. With 300,000 soldiers, some people had enough confidence, and even started to have thoughts of spying on the five-star army. They were spying on the five-star army, because they had their eyes on the guns in the hands of the five-star army. Through the information that they had obtained, they knew that there was a five-star army with less than 10,000 people that had rushed to Lang Son. They were working with Vietnam's General Hong Jin to settle down the Han people that had sought refuge here. The five-star army had been recruiting homeless Han people, and this matter was not a secret. Regarding this, everyone had different opinions. In this era where human rights were not valued, the lives of the commoners were like grass. This was especially so for the commoners who had no money and no food. Using the word refugees to describe them was the most appropriate. They really did not know what they could do by recruiting such people. Was it really because they had too much food to eat? Although the appearance of high-yield crops like potatoes had indeed solved the problem of the commoners' stomachs. However, with so many commoners going over, not only did they have to eat, but they also had to wear clothes and housing. All in all, it was not a small financial burden. Even if one had a large family, facing such a huge population, one would not be able to handle it. In truth, at the start of the year, when Yang Qindong was still in Qiqian City, they had already started to test out the pension insurance policy. It was not much different from the future, except that the workers and commoners would pay a certain amount of insurance each year, ensuring that they would not have to worry about food and clothing in their later years. The only difference was that the age limit for men to receive insurance was set at 50 years old, while women were set at 48 years old. After all, in that era, people's lifespans were relatively short. If they could only retire at 60 years old, it would be a huge blow to everyone's enthusiasm. Because it was a trial, only the Han people could participate in the insurance. Other foreign races did not have the right to participate in this policy. Even so, they were not able to receive much gold and silver, which greatly reduced the financial burden on Qiqian City. Yang Xie was very good at earning money. This was publicly acknowledged. Their products were very diverse, and just from the business side, the profits they brought every year were shocking. However, at the same time, they could also spend money. Some provinces were still not self-sufficient, and still needed to rely on Qiqian City for subsidies. In addition, there were constant battles, and the financial pressure was immense. Once this insurance policy was released, it would indeed solve a lot of problems. It would also allow Yangshi to have the ability to continue recruiting more homeless Han people. Zhu Huichen did not know about this, nor did he care about it. What he was interested in was the firearms in the hands of the High 7th Division. He had thought that if he could obtain such advanced weapons, when he faced off against the Southern Ming Empire, his confidence would be greatly boosted. Even unifying the entire Southern Ming Empire would not be a problem. With this thought in mind, Zhu Huichi looked for General Rajiv of the Bangladesh Army, and Wu Yingtu of the Miao province, who followed him to discuss whether they should ambush a five-star army and snatch their weapons. The three of them gathered together, and when they heard that they were going to face off against the five-star army, Wu Yingtu, who knew the details, was the first to speak. It is said that the five-star army is very powerful. It is not wise to be their enemy. Speaking of which, Wu Yingtu had also heard about the encounter between Miao Jinlong and the five-star army. He had some lingering fears, and was even a little scared. The remaining General Rajiv was dumbfounded. Obviously, his understanding of the five-star army was lacking. He could not understand why Wu Yingtu, who looked very sturdy, would be so cautious and even a little afraid when talking about this army. Zhu Huichen laughed. Wu Fang, although the five-star army is powerful, we have already received news that their main force is attacking Siam. There are 400,000 troops there. It is enough to make them suffer. Taking advantage of this opportunity, we should be able to deal with the five-star army. Moreover, I never fight an unprepared battle. I have already arranged for 3,000 elite soldiers to disguise themselves as ordinary Han people and head to Liangshan shelter. Once we launch an attack, we can attack from both sides and victory will definitely belong to us. At this time, Guangdong King no longer hid his trump card and showed it to everyone. At this point, Wu Yingtu finally stopped talking. After all, his Miao army only had 10,000 soldiers out of the 200,000 soldiers. If not for the fact that he brought the elites of the Miao army, he would not even have the right to speak. Rajiv was a person who was proficient in the Chinese language. This was the main reason why he could lead 100,000 Bengali soldiers. When he heard that he could take advantage of the situation, he could not help but say, "Since that is the case, what are we waiting for? Your Highness, let's make our move tonight." "Sai, there is no hurry. The agreed time is 3 days later. We still need to wait for the brothers over there to be ready," Zhu Huichen said calmly. Obviously, he already had a card up his sleeve. The 3,000 elite soldiers were indeed arranged to enter Liangshan shelter. Regarding this matter, the commander of the 7th Army, Tian Su, who was in charge of the shelter, and the temporary general of the shelter, Vietnamese General Hong Jin, knew nothing about it. There were simply too many Han people who came to seek refuge and protection every day. There were so many that they did not even have the time to distinguish between them. This also caused the shelter to be a mix of good and bad people, and even incidents of fighting occurred frequently. Chapter 1055. As long as no lives were lost, the 5-star army would not care. After all, they did not have enough manpower to do so. The 7th Army had over 8,000 men, and even with the 15,000 men of Vietnam General Hong Jin, they only had about 20,000 men. Facing the hundreds and thousands of Hans that were rushing over every day, they were not strong enough. "General Hong, I've already received a telegram. The matter at Xianluo City has been resolved. Currently, the 6th Young Master is leading 2 cavalry units north. We just need to stabilize the situation. Once the 6th Young Master arrives, everything will be fine." Tian Su looked at the number of people in the shelter and felt worried. However, he did not show it on his face. As a general, one of the most important things was to learn to be calm. No matter what the situation was, they would not panic. As an experienced veteran, Tian Su naturally understood this principle. When he heard that the 6th Young Master was leading his elite cavalry towards Lang Sun, the worried Hong Jin heaved a sigh of relief. "That's good. How about this? I'll immediately arrange for the troops to send a group of people back. Otherwise, as the number of people in the shelter increases, there will be problems sooner or later." Arranging for the troops to send the people back would require them to pass through the Lang Sun rainforest. That meant that they would have to split up. Tian Su, who was already lacking in manpower, did not object. He agreed and said, "All right, I'll leave it to General Hong." Just like that, the 5-star army, which was originally lacking in manpower, was split up by another 3,000 soldiers. As such, the total number of soldiers left in Langshan was only slightly over 20,000. However, there were still 50,000 civilians left in Langshan. Furthermore, more and more people were arriving every day. At this rate, the pressure would only increase. What was even more unexpected to Tian Su was that among the nearly 50,000 people, there were also 3,000 elite soldiers sent by King Guangdong, Zhu Huihua. They disguised themselves as ordinary people and scattered around. In the chaotic situation, they did not attract the attention of others. It was only on the night of the appointment that these people began to gather together. Some of the smarter ones had already figured out the timing and method of the 5-star army's change of guard. Considering the limited manpower, Tian Su decided to use the Cold Front Army and the Vietnamese army to defend together. They would rotate every 6 hours, and there would be 4 shifts a day. Each shift consisted of a battalion of Cold Vanguard soldiers and 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers. The Vietnamese army was mainly in charge of the safety and order of the shelter, while the Cold Front was in charge of defending the outer perimeter, preventing the Prince of Little Nam Ming's army and the Bangladesh army from launching an attack on them. On this point, the Heavenly Strategy Division Master and General Hong Jin came to an agreement. They did not think that the opponent had the guts to provoke them. However, for the sake of safety, they still made a basic defense. That night, Battalion Commander Zhou Shixue brought a battalion of 400 soldiers to take over the defense. They would be responsible for the security of the perimeter for the next 6 hours. At that time, the sky would be bright. It was November. Even in the south, it was cold in the mornings. After the soldiers arrived at their positions, they quickly quieted down. In order to preserve the heat in their bodies, there were very few people who spoke. After Battalion Commander Zhou began to change the defense, Zhu Jian also began to gather his 3,000 subordinates to prepare for a counterattack. According to Prince Guangtong's plan, they had decided to launch a surprise attack at night, leaving them less than an hour. Zhu Jian was a subordinate that Zhu Huiyan had favored, and this time he had given him such an important mission. General Zhu also wanted to make use of this opportunity to showcase his skills. As he gathered his subordinates, he called for a few of the leaders and instructed them. In a while, we will first deal with the 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers. Their strength is average and not hard to deal with. After that, we will set fire to the perimeter. After that, the 500 of you will join me to deal with the 5-star army. They have many firearms in their hands. Once we can get our hands on one, we will have done a great deed. The more we get, the greater the merit. Understand? Please rest assured, General Zhu, we know what to do. A few of the leaders had a smug look on their faces, before they laughed coldly, as though their evil plan was about to succeed. Time passed by slowly, and there was only a quarter of an hour left before the agreed time to launch the attack. Zhu Jian then gestured for them to start moving, and the 3,000 elite soldiers immediately pulled out their weapons, as they slowly made their way towards the 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers. How could the 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers know that something like this would happen? Some of them were still leaning against the trees, resting with their eyes closed. Suddenly, their mouths were covered by someone, and they felt a sharp pain in their necks. Their strength was quickly drained away, and their blood flowed out. This scene happened in many different places, and one by one, the unprepared Vietnamese soldiers were killed. In order to cover up the stench of blood, and to prevent the 5-star army from coming to their aid, huge fires started to burn all over the shelter, and soon after, the sky was dyed red by the blazing flames. Haha, Zhu Jian and the rest have already begun to move. Order the entire army to attack. On the outskirts of Lang Mountain, Prince Guangtong Zhu Huiyun's eyes flashed with a pleased glint, as he gave the order to attack. At the same time, he turned to General Rajiv and said, "This time, it's up to your cavalry." "That's easy. We have 20,000 cavalry, and it's enough to trample any enemy formation," Rajiv said with a face full of pride, as he also had the confidence to do so. After all, when cavalry faced infantry, they had a natural advantage. In this way, the hooves of the horses stomped on the ground, and the rumbling of the ground resounded. In the darkness, a black mass of enemies flew toward the Langshan asylum. The moment the flames started to burn behind them, Zhou Shixue knew that things weren't looking good, and a few of his company commanders had also requested for a counterattack. However, he felt that things weren't that simple. Was it just a few fires behind them? Thinking about the 300,000 enemy troops, Zhou Shixue decisively gave up on the idea of turning back to extinguish the flames. Instead, he ordered all the soldiers to focus their attention and prevent the enemy from breaking through from the front. Zhou Shixue's estimation was right, and soon he heard the sound of hooves stomping on the ground. His intuition told him that the number of cavalry coming from the opposite side wouldn't be too small, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was a magnificent army. He immediately shouted, "Everyone take out grenades. Once the enemy is too close, we'll fight with them." The threat of firearms to cavalry was still too small. After all, the war horses were too fast, and they might not even be able to fire a few shots before the enemy arrived in front of them. Only weapons like grenades could stop the enemy for a moment, but of course, they also had to pay a heavy price. However, at this moment, Zhou Shixue had already disregarded his own life and death. What he was thinking about now was how to buy time for the army behind him, and the shelter to retreat. As for his own battalion, since fate had chosen him, they could only resign themselves to fate. After the order was given, The 400 soldiers of the battalion all raised their spirits, and then looked forward with a deep expression. At this moment, their hands holding their guns tightened, and their eyes became more profound. At this moment, the 400 soldiers already knew what it meant when the battalion commander didn't give the order to retreat, but no one said a word. Since they had chosen to join the cold front, they had to be prepared to face death at any time. This was the oath they had sworn the moment they joined the army. Family, relatives, friends, comrades, farewell. I believe that you will avenge us. Fire. Under the dim moonlight, Zhou Shishua noticed that the black shadows were getting closer and closer, and he immediately gave the order to fire. The soldiers of the cold front were prepared to die, and now they were firing bullets out of their guns. At this moment, they didn't care about aiming at the enemy, nor did they care about saving bullets. At this moment, only the sound of gunfire could be heard, and light flashed out one after another, shooting towards the approaching enemy. At the rear of the camp, the sound of hooves could be heard from the fire at the front. Division Commander Tian Su and Vietnamese General Hong Jin both walked out of their tents. Not good, the enemy has really launched an attack. General Hong quickly split the men into two groups. One group will take the supplies, while the other group will rush to the shelter. Take as many people as you can. If you can't take the supplies, burn them on the spot. Don't leave them for the enemy. The rest of the 7 divisions, follow me and attack. Tian Su only stayed silent for a few breaths before he made a series of military arrangements. Division Commander Tian, you should retreat with us. Hong Jin's face was filled with anxiety. Everyone knew that if they stayed behind to fight the enemy, there would definitely be sacrifices. The members of the Cold Front were all treasures. General Hong, there is no need to persuade me. What I said just now is a military order. Please carry it out. As he spoke, Tian Su had already taken the gun holster from the guard and hung it on his body. Then he led the main force of the 7 divisions and rushed forward. Tian Su's first goal was not to put out the fire, because at this moment, the fire was already too big to be controlled. What he wanted to do now was to rescue the battalion that was responsible for defending the perimeter. That was the 400 Cold Front brothers. However, the soldiers of the 7 divisions had only rushed forward a few hundred meters when a series of explosions sounded in their ears. From afar, they could see flashes of fire. Seeing this, Division Commander Tian Su couldn't help but punch a tree beside him, his face filled with anger. As a soldier of the Cold Front, he naturally knew what caused the explosion. It was definitely caused by a grenade being ignited. Considering the limited range of the grenade, didn't that mean that their comrades had already come into close contact with the enemy? Chapter 1056. That was an opponent with 300,000 soldiers. With only 400 people, it was easy to guess what kind of situation would occur. Everyone knew that the entire battalion of Lung Feng brothers was probably going to be wiped out. What should we do? 1st Regiment Commander Bu Hai walked in front of Tian Su and asked for instructions. His mood was very heavy since this battalion of soldiers belonged to his regiment. Stop advancing. Plant landmines to stop the enemy from advancing. Then retreat in batches. Even though Tian Su wanted to lead his brothers to charge forward, his rationality told him that this was not the time to fight. There were still many people in the shelter who had not retreated. They had not completed their mission, and could not do as they pleased. 1st Regiment Commander Bu Hai also had an indignant look on his face. He was sad that he couldn't save his comrades, but he also knew that the decision of his division commander was correct. With just one division, it was impossible for them to defeat the 300,000 enemy, not to mention the existence of the cavalry. Plant landmines and retreat as we fight. Bu Hai said with hatred. The moment he turned around to carry out the order, tears flowed out uncontrollably from the corner of his eyes. At the front line, grenades were detonated one after another. Cold Vanguard soldiers died together with the enemy cavalry. Not even their bones were left behind. In just 15 minutes, the 100 soldiers of the 1st Battalion had all died. Battalion Commander Zhou Shishua's eyes were filled with tears as he gave another order. 2nd Company forward. Even though they knew that they would die without a doubt if they charged forward, The second company commander and all the soldiers did not hesitate at all. After agreeing, they all ran out of the trench. If one looked closely, one could see that everyone was holding at least 2 grenades in their hands. It was clear that they were prepared to take the enemy down with them. Boom! Boom! Another explosion sounded. Second company down. Third company down. Very quickly, the third company was also gone. When only the fourth company was left, Zhou Shishue also took out 2 grenades and held them in his arms. He also took out his Type 5 gun. He would rather die than let the gun fall into the hands of the enemy. The gun would be there if the person was alive, and the gun would be destroyed if the person was dead. This was the death rule that the Cold Vanguard soldiers had to abide by. Comrades, we won't die in vain. The 6th young master will definitely avenge us. Everyone, charge with me. Following Zhou Shishue's shout, hundreds of soldiers rushed out of the trenches in a scattered formation towards the incoming cavalry. Every one of them looked like they were ready to die, with smiles and satisfaction on their faces. Boom, 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 boom. The sounds of explosions were endless. This was a heroic song, a song composed by the soldiers of the Cold Vanguard. They used their actions and their lives to illustrate what it meant to fight to the last second, what it meant to die a worthy death, and what it meant to die a worthy death. Zhou Shishue's first battalion of 400 soldiers had all died in exchange for the 5-star army's time to retreat. Other than the rations that they brought with them, the rest were all burned. They didn't leave anything for the enemy. It was just that because they were in a rush, out of the 50,000 civilians, only 10,000 were brought away. It was just that once the war started, the situation was too chaotic. They didn't listen to orders and ran around randomly. There were even some who directly escaped to the barracks of the Little South Ming Army. The 5-star army took the initiative to retreat into the Liangshan rainforest. Once they entered the forest, there were giant trees everywhere. If one were to enter the forest without any experience, he or she would be surrounded by danger. This kind of natural protective environment stopped the Little South Ming Army and the Bangladeshis from chasing after them. After the battle, they destroyed the 5-star army's shelter and captured 40,000 civilians. Although they did not manage to snatch the rations, Zhu Huijin was still very satisfied with the harvest. That was the 5-star army. It was said that they were very powerful, and no one dared to go against them. Now that they were chased away by him, didn't that mean that he was much more powerful than the 5-star army? After the 5-star army was chased away, the arrogant Zhu Huijin decided to go to the troop division. He wanted to eliminate the remaining troops of Shi Pingwang and completely eliminate the hidden dangers left here. Once the rear was stable, it would be time for him to go to the east and attack the Great South Ming Army. Yang Chendong received the news that the Little South Ming Army had attacked, and the shelter was forced to retreat. When he heard this, he was not as anxious as before. The Little South Ming Army had 300,000 soldiers, and this was only one area. If the Little South Ming King's army was included, this number would probably double. However, he only had 2 cavalry divisions, and no matter how good he was at fighting, it would be difficult for him to win against so many enemies. Moreover, most of the enemies were Han Chinese, and unless it was absolutely necessary, he did not want to make an enemy out of the Han Chinese and cause internal strife. Inform the 100,000 foreign troops behind us, and tell them to hurry up and meet up with us. Tell the cavalry brothers to stop and rest for 3 days. Take good care of the war horses and rest. After days of rushing, even Yang Chendong felt a bit tired, let alone the ordinary cavalry soldiers. 6th young master, our brothers from the 1st Cavalry Division can hold on. Hearing that they were going to stop, Division Commander Tian Hu did not know what was going on ahead, volunteered. With their level of training, it was just rushing for days. It was not a big deal. The division commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Lu Zhua, also wanted to take the opportunity to say that they could continue. However, Yang Chendong waved his hand and said, "I told you to rest, so rest. This is an order." With a simple sentence, the 2 division commanders stopped talking and started to carry out the order. The army stopped at the border between Laos and Yunnan province and started to rest. After Yang Chendong got off his horse, He took the letter that said that the Little South Ming army was marching towards Cheli Division. After reading it, he threw it aside. Speaking of which, what did Shiping King's order have to do with him? He wanted more of these dog-eat-dog situations to happen. Yang Chendong did not care about Shiping King Mubin's life, but he cherished his own life. Not long after he settled down in Cheli Division, he received news that King Guangtong Zhu Huihua and the Bangladesh army were coming for him. He was so shocked that he almost fell off his chair. He quickly asked someone to call Wang Ji, the former Minister of War, and Muong over to discuss countermeasures. After a short meeting, the three of them agreed on the same thing, which was to retreat. At this moment, they only had 50,000 Mu clan soldiers in their hands. Among them, only 20,000 were true elites. No matter what, they would not be a match for 300,000 enemies. Even if they knew that they could not win, why fight? It was better to retreat and preserve their strength. We can't bring all 50,000. There are too many people. We can't supply enough food, Wang Ji said. Then we'll only bring 20,000 elites. Mu Bin was also very generous. He decided to leave 30,000 soldiers behind. Muong wanted to say something, but after thinking for a while, he decided not to. In his opinion, a good general would not abandon his soldiers at will. But now, the situation was urgent. For their own safety, they had no choice but to make some painful decisions. Mu Bin did not announce the decision to leave 30,000 Mu soldiers behind. Instead, he said that he would take 20,000 elites to attack the enemy's flanks. When the time came, they would attack from two sides. Out of trust in King Shiping, the 30,000 Mu soldiers believed him and stayed in Cheli Division. However, when they were surrounded by a large number of soldiers and did not see King Shiping appear, they realized that they had been deceived. These people were also straightforward. Since they knew that they had been abandoned, they might as well just surrender. Like this, Zhu Huihua took down the 30,000 Mu army without shedding a drop of blood. He took down Cheli Division and his strength increased greatly. As for the 20,000 elite Mu soldiers that Mu Bin brought with him, no one knew where they went. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. However, Zhu Huihua thought that the other party only had 20,000 people. They could not cause any trouble. Zhu Huihua did not care about it. The most important thing was that he had received news that Bugnam of Gojoseon was coming to him with his men. This attracted all his attention. Bugnam of Gojoseon Yang Chendong's debut was like a mystery from the beginning. Even if the 5-star army now had great power, it was still puzzling how he rose to such a scale. It was as if there was an additional force in the realm. In particular, ever since the establishment of the 5-star army, it had been successful in every endeavor. No opponent seemed to be able to stop their vanguard. This made his status even more legendary. Just based on this, Zhu Huihua wanted to have a battle with him. He wanted to see if the other party was really as powerful as the legends said. Zhu Huihua was still thinking that if he could defeat Bugnam of Gojoseon, his name would be spread all over the world. At that time, it would not be impossible for him to seek the title of emperor. Yes, Zhu Huihua had always been very ambitious, especially when it came to his brother, the former King Minzhuang, the current King Little Nanming. Zhu Huihua had always wanted to replace his brother, but he just lacked the right opportunity. Now that he had more than 300,000 troops in his hands, he believed that the opportunity had come. As long as he could defeat the 5-star army led by Bugnam of Gojoseon, then he would have the qualifications to challenge his brother. He would also usher in his own career and glory. Having confidence was one thing, but the battle record of the 5-star army was there. Moreover, they also had firearms. All of these made Zhu Huihua have no choice but to deal with them. He called over a group of generals and began to discuss the strategic arrangements. When it came to war, this person still had some ability. More than 300,000 soldiers were spread out according to his arrangements, scattered in the borders of Yunnan and Guangxi. It was guaranteed that as long as the 5-star soldiers left Langshan, they would be able to pounce on them like locusts, encircling them and eating them. Time passed day by day, and both sides began to make arrangements. Yang Chendong also waited for the arrival of the 100,000 foreign allied troops. Under his command, the 100,000 troops were divided into 5 divisions. Each division had 20,000 people. Chapter 1057. Furthermore, he had chosen 4 company leaders from the Black Cavalry to be the division commanders. These people had already displayed their talent and ability to command troops. Now that they finally had the chance to lead troops, their wishes had been fulfilled. These 5 people were the 1st Regiment Commander Niu Duo, the 2nd Regiment Commander Tu Hai, the 3rd Regiment Commander Luan Xiaojiang, the 4th Regiment Commander Chu Duo, as well as the 5th Regiment Commander Mo Benyi. The 5 of them were all promoted to senior colonel, and could be considered to have been promoted to the front lines. The 5 foreign races, the 1st Cavalry Army, and the 1st Cavalry Division, a total of 120,000 people had passed through Yunnan Province and the rainforest, heading straight for Langsun. While waiting for the army to arrive, Yang Chendong had also thought about how to deal with the Han army. Although he did not wish for the Han people to exhaust themselves, it was just a thought in his mind. Since it was a war, there would always be deaths. Blindly thinking about settling the southern Ming issue peacefully was not going to work. Only by fighting a few battles and letting the other party feel pain and fear would they be able to sit down and negotiate. Sometimes, the truth was decided through fighting. Regardless of whether Yang Chendong wanted to admit it or not, this was the truth. Since that was the case, he would just fight. After making up his mind, Yang Chendong changed his hesitation and gave the order to advance. However, he added a sentence at the end, that there was no need to be courteous when facing the Bangladesh army. If they could kill, then kill. Only when facing the Han army, if they could capture, then capture. For this reason, he set a standard for the 100,000 foreign races. What reward would they receive for killing 1 person? What reward would they receive for killing 3 people? What reward would they receive for capturing 1 person? What reward would they receive for capturing 3 or more people, etc.? The 100,000 foreign races who had originally wanted to use the military to change their lives were all excited when they saw the reward system. They knew that it was time to realize the value of their lives. As long as they performed perfectly, not only would they benefit, even their families would also benefit. As a result, the morale of the army was extremely high. Once they left the rainforest area, they would have a showdown with the Southern Ming Empire's army. In order to fight this battle well, long before Yang Chendong arrived, the 7th Army had already sent out all of their scouts. In addition, Chief of Intelligence Yang Chendong had also sent out a large number of department elites to the 2 provinces to investigate the enemy situation. Thus, Zhu Huiqiu's military arrangements could be said to be extremely clear to Yang Chendong. Looking at the summary of intelligence collected by various departments, Yang Chendong couldn't help but sigh. This Lord Guangtong is not an idiot, he's really something. This judgment was based on Zhu Huiqiu's battlefield layout. From the intelligence, the enemy's military arrangements were very appropriate and orderly. It could basically guarantee that once one area was attacked, the other armies could quickly provide support. If things went wrong, the 5-star army would be entangled, and then be drowned by the enemy's human wave tactics. The sand table was placed in front of him. Yang Chendong called over the 7 division commanders under him, and let them understand the enemy's battlefield layout. When the red and black flags were placed in the 2 provinces, Tian Hu and the others were all shocked. Yang Chendong knew why they were shocked. After all, when he first received the news, he also sincerely praised them. Thus he wasn't surprised. Instead, he smiled and asked the 7 division commanders, "Come tell me, what do you think?" To be able to show their faces in front of the 6th young master, naturally, no one wanted to let go of this opportunity. At that moment, Lu Zhua, as a veteran division commander, was the first to speak. 6th young master, from what I see, this Lord Guangtong is quite capable. Look at his layout. It can be said that he is prepared to defend to the death. Especially the territory near Liang Mountain. It is like an iron bucket. If my guess is correct, they should want to trap us first. Then after a war of attrition, they will gather their superior forces to fight us to the death and finally eat us. Humph, Division Commander Tian Hu sneered. He was laughing at Lord Guangtong's overestimation of his strength. Yang Chendong was also laughing. Although this time they brought a mixed army, they were not inexperienced on the battlefield. The war in Siam allowed these 100,000 people to grow. Although there was still a big gap between them and the real elites of the 5-star army, such as the Cold Front, they could at least be regarded as a B-class army. As long as they were used well and their morale was boosted, winning this battle would not be a problem. The other 5 division commanders who led the foreign army had different expressions on their faces. However, it could be seen that they were not frightened. Instead, they were eager to try. This was their first battle after becoming division commanders. Naturally, everyone wanted to perform well. Taking in everyone's expressions, Yang Chendong looked at Tian Hu and said, "Come, Division Commander Tian, tell us, what do you think?" Yes. Although he was already a major general, in front of Yang Chendong, Tian Hu was still a student. He first stood at attention, then took a wooden stick from the side and pointed at the sand table. "Everyone, please look. After leaving Liang Mountain, 200 miles to the west is Yongji City. To the north is Linshan, and to the west is Siming Prefecture. This is like a pocket. Once someone enters, it can be firmly blocked. This is also the problem we will encounter after leaving the mountain." "That's right." The other division commanders, including Yang Chendong, nodded gently. Obviously, everyone agreed with this statement. At the same time, everyone wanted to hear what Tian Hu was going to say next. The problem was already in front of them. How to solve it was the most important thing. Yang Chendong also stared at Tian Hu. He already had a solution in his heart. He just didn't know if the two of them thought of the same thing. Under everyone's expectant gaze, Tian Hu opened his mouth. "Once we are surrounded by the enemy, it will be extremely difficult for us to eliminate them with the advantage of their military strength. If we fight with force, even if we can win, it will only be a lose-lose situation. Therefore, the only thing we can do is to break their arrangements. We can only rely on speed." When he heard the word speed, Yang Chendong's brows couldn't help but rise high. A satisfied expression appeared on his face. This result was exactly as he had expected. It seemed that Tian Hu already had the demeanor of a general. Without looking at other people's reactions, Tian Hu opened his mouth again. "In terms of military strength, we are inferior to the enemy. In terms of understanding the terrain, we are also inferior. Most of us are composed of foreign allied forces. We have just entered the southern Ming land, and there are many aspects that we need to adapt to. Just from this analysis, the situation is not good for us. But please don't forget that we still have 2 cavalry divisions, and one of them is the 1st Cavalry Division. This is our advantage, an advantage that the southern Ming army can't reach. As long as we fight with speed, we can disrupt the enemy's arrangements. As long as we don't let the enemy form an encirclement, we will have the opportunity to break them one by one. At that time, it will depend on whether everyone can grasp the opportunity." After finally expressing his opinion, Tian Hu returned to his original silent appearance, leaving the other division commanders there to discuss whether Tian Hu's plan was feasible. Yang Chendong saw everything in his eyes, but he didn't intend to interrupt. He just wanted to take the opportunity to see everyone's performance. After all, he wouldn't be able to stay with these division commanders in every battle. His ability to be independent was still being developed. After a short while, everyone stopped their discussion. Tu Hai, the commander of the 2nd Military Division, asked on behalf of the other commanders, "Commander Tian, we all know what you mean. But where do you plan to attack first by attacking the slow with speed?" "Linshan." Tian Hu pointed to the north on the sand table and said, "This place is bordered by Yongji to the west and Siming residents to the west. As long as we can disrupt this place, it will be the same as cutting off the enemy's gathering. At that time, no matter which side we attack, the difficulty will be much lower." Division Commander Tu Hai nodded, indicating that he agreed with this decision. However, he still asked a question. "Is it just relying on the 1st Cavalry Division? The intelligence has already said that there are more than 30,000 enemies in Linshan. You only have 10,000 people, and you will face the reinforcements of the southern Ming army at any time. Are you sure there won't be any problems? There isn't a target that the 1st Cavalry Division can't take down," Tian Hu said with a face full of pride. Then he looked at Lu Zhua. "Of course, if Division Commander Lu's 1st Cavalry Division can cooperate with us and pretend to attack Yongji City, we can distract the enemy's attention. This will be a great help in reducing the pressure on our 1st Cavalry Division. No matter how arrogant the world's 1st Cavalry Division was, it was impossible for them to win against the Southern Ming Alliance's army of more than 300,000 people. No problem, the 1st Cavalry Division is willing to cooperate with Division Commander Tian, Lu Zhua said. From being the 1st Division Commander of the new division to the current Division Commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, he spent most of his time assisting in battles. Adding on the fact that he was cooperating with the 1st Cavalry Division, he didn't think that it was shameful to be assisting in battles. Many thanks. Seeing Lu Zhua agree so quickly, Tian Hu's face revealed a look of gratitude. Since the 2 cavalry divisions had expressed their opinions, the other 5 division commanders naturally didn't have any doubts. They immediately said in unison, "Then we have no problems. As long as Division Commander Tian can break the enemy's formation, we only need 3 days to take down Ximing residents." The 7 division commanders made a battle plan. Yang Chendong nodded, indicating that he approved. Next, each side began to make various preparations. This time, Yang Chendong didn't have any intention of using the 7th Army. He wanted to test the strength of the Southern Ming Army. Whether or not they could take down Ximing residents within 3 days became the goal of the test. If the facts proved that this army could be used, then he would give them more important missions in the future, and give them the opportunity to become stronger. On the other hand, if the facts proved that they couldn't, then he would think of a way to develop other armies. Chapter 1058. Unifying the world and making the Han Chinese the leader. This was something that many experts had never thought of before. Not only did Yang Chendong think of it, but he also wanted to make it a reality. Originally, he would have to face all sorts of problems, and some of the decisions he made would have to be made repeatedly. However, once the facts proved that he was right, he would definitely persevere. Just like the Foreign Alliance, the outcome of this battle would determine whether Yang Chendong would vigorously develop them in the future, or directly cancel them. After the decision was made, as the side that was going to attack the city, the 5 foreign races alliance continued to travel through the rainforest. They also used their rest time to cut down trees and make ladders. Although they had not completely left the rainforest and arrived at Langsun, the aura of war was already very strong. Another 10 days passed, and the 120,000 5-star army finally arrived at Langsun, meeting up with the 7th Army and the Vietnamese Army. The Heavenly Strategies Division and Hongjin came up to Yang Chendong with a guilty look on their faces. After whispering to the 6th young master, they did not dare to raise their heads. "Raise your heads!" Looking at the 2 generals, Yang Chendong shouted angrily. Being shouted at, the 2 of them had no choice but to raise their heads, and they saw Yang Chendong's angry expression. When their eyes met, the latter said, "This battle was not your fault. The enemy had 300,000 people, and you only had 20,000. This was not a fair battle. You were able to escape unscathed, and even brought back 10,000 Han civilians. This is already a great achievement. What is there to be ashamed of? One couldn't be without pride. Otherwise he wouldn't be a qualified general." If Tian Su and Hongjin couldn't recover, Yang Chendong would have no choice but to transfer them out of their current posts and take up civilian positions elsewhere. After all, if a general was not hot-blooded, how could he win a battle? Now the questioning was just his last effort. It would be best if he could scold them to wake them up, but if he couldn't, he could only give up. Luckily, Tian Su and Hongjin were still very courageous. They felt guilty not because they couldn't defeat the Southern Ming Alliance, but because they had suffered losses in this battle, especially the 7th Army. Zhao Shixue's 1st Regiment and 1st Battalion were completely annihilated. Not a single person escaped. As a teacher, Tian Su felt that he had a responsibility. Originally, he thought that the 6th young master would blame him, but unexpectedly, that was not the case at all. The 2 raised their heads and saluted together, saying, "6th young master, don't worry, we're already prepared. We're just waiting for the main force to arrive. Once the order is given, we'll join the counterattack. We want to avenge our comrades who died in the shelter. Revenge is a must, but we won't need you in the first battle. The 7th Army will stay by this young master's side." The Vietnamese army will continue to take care of the Han people, including the captives on the battlefield. Do you have any problems with that? Comparatively speaking, as a local army, the strength of the Vietnamese army was considered the weakest. At most, they could be considered as a C-grade soldier. Even if there were many of them, their usefulness on the battlefield would be limited. Knowing that, it would be better to leave them at the rear and do some work within their capabilities. Since it was Yang Chendong's order, of course no one would object. The two generals thus agreed. After the two sides met up, they prepared to leave Lang Son and attack the Little Nanming alliance. This time, Yang Chendong wanted to use reality to tell those who dared to spy on the five-star army that they were not to be trifled with. They had already made their preparations. On the third day after meeting up with the 7th Army and the Vietnamese Army, the 1st Cavalry Division was the first to move out. They headed straight for Linchen in the northeast. Following that, the 5 outsiders also moved out. They had their eyes on Ximing Prefecture in the east. The last to move out was Luju's 1st Cavalry Division. They went to Yongji City in the west to cooperate with Division Commander Tian Hu. They finally moved. Nanning Prefecture, the central city of Guangxi. Guangdong King Zhu Huitu was currently presiding over the situation. Only half a day after the 5-star army moved out, a carrier pigeon brought the news. He said coldly, "Send people to investigate again." The scout left. Zhu Huitu started to read some information about the 5-star army. There were reports about the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division. However, because the outsiders had just been formed, they had only shown their might in Siam. There were not many records about them. Even so, the current information was enough for Zhu Huichun to analyze it properly. After an hour, Zhu Huitu shook his stiff neck and said, "The 1st Cavalry Division is not to be trifled with." This conclusion was not hard to come to. After all, this unit was too famous. Wherever they appeared, they would stir up trouble. Once Yang Chendong met with trouble, this unit would be mobilized and become the strongest killing weapon. When they took down the Phnom Penh dynasty, this unit was the main force. It only took them 31 days to take down a kingdom. This was almost unimaginable. However, they did it. With this, even Zhu Huitu did not dare to be careless. As the saying goes, pick the soft bone first. He did not want to meet such a strong opponent and dampen the morale of his soldiers. Just as he made the decision not to become enemies with the 1st Cavalry Division, a second carrier pigeon arrived. The details of the 5-star army moving out over 100,000 people were revealed. Guangxi was the territory of the Little Nanming King. Many places here were filled with their spies. It was undoubtedly difficult to avoid the spies. Yang Chendong did not intend to hide the movement of the army. He came openly and wanted to see how the Little Nanming King would deal with it. Previously, Yao Yingjun, an intelligence agent in the Little Nanming King group, had already sent news that Zhu Huitu was sinister and cunning. He was the kind of person who was not easy to deal with. However, Yang Chendong still did not put him in his eyes. He believed that with the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division, even if they could not defeat the opponent, if they wanted to retreat, no one would be able to stop them. Yang Chendong was too confident. He did not expect Zhu Huitu to not become enemies with the 1st Cavalry Division at all. Instead, he targeted the 1st Cavalry Division. It was better to break one finger than to injure all 10. Zhu Huitu wanted to make a name for himself through the battle with the 5-star army. Therefore, he was already prepared for a tough battle. With the advantage of military strength, he believed that as long as the plan was good, he would be able to achieve his goal. He had never thought of completely wiping out the 5-star army. He did not have that kind of strength. As long as he could repel the attack of the 5-star army, it would be enough for him to strengthen his reputation. The 1st Cavalry Division became the stepping stone for him to become famous. Immediately send troops to Yongji City. At the same time, inform Wu Yingtu to do his best to wipe out this cavalry division. As long as he can accomplish this task, it will be a great merit. Also, don't forget to tell him how many people he loses in this battle. When he returns, he can choose double the number of soldiers. Zhu Huitu's face flashed with a sinister gaze. As for the news that a large number of 5-star army soldiers were heading towards Ximing residence, he directly ignored it. They had only lost a small city. Compared to the cavalry division that could destroy a 5-star corps, it was easy for them to deal with such a heavy burden. The news was sent through carrier pigeons. Half a day later, it reached Wuxia too. At this moment, he was drinking with the general of the Bangladesh army, Rajiv. When he saw this order, he could not help but laugh. He could choose any soldiers he wanted, and the compensation was 2-to-1. This was a good deal. In the worst-case scenario, he could lose 10,000 Miao people in exchange for 20,000 elite Ming soldiers. Since it was like this, what was there to be afraid of? He drank the wine in his bowl in one gulp and looked at Rajiv. Of course, he said to the interpreter beside him, "Tell him that we should get to work." Afterwards, the large net targeting the 1st Cavalry Division began to unfold. Meanwhile, Wuxia, who was completely unaware of all of this, was leading the 1st Cavalry Division to wander around Yongji City. His mission was to attack the small Baiming reinforcements that came out from here, and do his best to ensure the safety of the 1st Cavalry Division's left wing. Wuxia, who never thought that anyone would make an enemy out of his cavalry, and did not know that he had already been targeted, only had Yongji City in front of him in his eyes. He was completely unaware that small southern Ming soldiers were continuously gathering around him and surrounding him. 1 day passed, 2 days passed, and on the 4th day he still did not see any reinforcements coming out from Yongji City. Even if Wuxia was a careless person, he still felt that something was not right. Logically speaking, Division Commander Tian, who should have already started attacking the surrounding areas. Due to the limitations of the cavalry, the level of the siege was average. However, sweeping through the villages and important roads around the city should not be a problem. Why did Yongji City not have any intention of sending reinforcements? Reporting, Division Commander. The scouts have reported that small southern Ming soldiers have been discovered behind us. Reporting, Division Commander. The scouts have reported that an unknown number of enemies have been discovered on our right. Reporting, our left. The reports entered Wuxia's ears one after another. At this moment, his expression was constantly changing. He finally understood why there had been no movement for 4 days in a row. It seemed that someone had set their sights on him. However, this was a cavalry division, and they were also cavalry warriors who had experienced hundreds of battles on the grasslands. Did they really think that they could take them down in one go? Immediately send a report to the 6th young master, and report the situation here. At this moment, Wuxia's eyes did not show any fear. On the contrary, there was a bit of excitement. For a long time, he had wanted to lead an army and fight the enemy alone to prove his ability. Chapter 1059. Now the opportunity had finally appeared. Order the 1st Regiment to be in the north, the 2nd Regiment to be in the east, the 3rd Regiment to be in the west, and the 4th Regiment to be in the back. Form an effective defense mechanism and wait for my orders. Get ready to attack, Wuxia shouted excitedly. He couldn't wait to kill. To be honest, when he found out that the little Nanming army wanted to surround him, he was somewhat angry. They were clearly looking down on him. Since that was the case, he naturally wanted to show them how powerful he was, and let them know that the 1st Cavalry Division was not so easy to bully. At the same time, the telegram was sent to Yang Chendong in the Langshan Plains shelter. At this moment, it wasn't just the 1st Cavalry Division that sent the telegram. The 1st Cavalry Division and the Alien Alliance Army also sent the telegram. The 100,000 troops of the Alien Alliance Army had already begun to attack the Ximing residence. Everything was going very smoothly. They didn't encounter any enemy reinforcements. With 100,000 people attacking a city with only 20,000 soldiers, there were no variables. The only thing they lacked now was time. However, the contents of the telegram from the 1st Cavalry Division were a bit strange. According to Tian Hu, when they arrived outside Linshan, the little Nanming army had already retreated into the city. Then they swept through the periphery. Other than some civilians who stayed here, they didn't encounter any other army. It felt like they had punched cotton. It was a bit uncomfortable. Tian Hu felt that something was wrong, so he sent a telegram to ask what to do next. After all, it was a pity that a sharp weapon release couldn't kill the enemy. Yang Chendong was also puzzled by this telegram. His intuition told him that something was wrong. The little Nanming army must be planning something, but he couldn't figure out what their goal was. It was also at this time that the telegram from the 1st Cavalry Division came. When they learned that there were enemies there, and their numbers were unknown, Yang Chendong suddenly sobered up and said, "Not good. The enemy is going to attack the 1st Cavalry Division. Young master, let's go rescue them." Beta Persei had long been itching for a fight. When he heard that there was finally a battle to fight, he volunteered. "I'm afraid it's too late." Yang Chendong didn't immediately agree. Instead, he came to the sand table and looked at the distance between them before shaking his head. There were only 1,000 black knights by his side. The rest were the main forces of the 7th Army. However, they did not have the help of war horses, so they could not move too fast. If they ran on foot, the 1st Cavalry Division would have suffered heavy losses before they could reach the battlefield. Beta Persei's heart sank when he heard Yang Chendong say that it was too late. He then asked, "Young master, should we send Division Commander Tian Hu to rescue them?" Yang Chendong wanted to say that since the other party was targeting the 1st Cavalry Division, it was impossible for them not to send someone to watch the 1st Cavalry Division. Sending him to rescue them would be dangerous. However, when he thought about how Linchen was not too far away, a rescue plan quickly formed in his mind. Yes, immediately send a telegram to Tian Hu and ask him to send the main forces to support the 1st Cavalry Division. Tell him that if someone tries to stop them, don't be afraid. Young master, I will immediately lead the troops to support them. Also, send a telegram to Division Commander Lujua, and tell him not to be rash. Concentrate the troops and wait for reinforcements. Yang Chendong said to Wang Shan, who was following beside him. He then called for Beta Persei to gather the Black Knights and the 7th Army to quickly gather. The telegram was quickly sent out. Tian Hu, who received the order, did not dare to delay. He immediately ordered the 2nd Regiment Commander Lu Duo, the 3rd Regiment Commander Hu Bo and the 4th Regiment Commander Bai Shuang to lead their troops to Yongji City. The 3 regiment commanders brought the 6,000 cavalry and turned their horses around, preparing to leave. At that moment, the gates of Linchen City opened, and the soldiers of the South Ming Army poured out. Needless to say, they could tell that the 1st Cavalry Division wanted to leave, so they charged out and wanted to stop them. "Division Commander, what should we do?" The 2nd Regiment Commander Lu Duo saw that the enemy had actually taken the initiative to leave the city. He was hesitant as to whether or not he should carry out his previous orders. "Don't worry so much, just follow the orders." Tian Hu narrowed his eyes and looked at the South Ming Army that had appeared, revealing traces of killing intent. From the reports, he knew that the enemy only had 20,000 soldiers. The 4,000 cavalry that he had left behind were enough to deal with them. Moreover, the 6th young master had already said that he would bring reinforcements. What was there to be afraid of? Knowing that their division commander had made up his mind, the 3 regiment commanders looked at each other and raised the horsewhips in their hands. They brought their cavalry and left the battlefield, heading towards Yongji City. "Everyone listen to my orders. Check the bows and swords." Tian Hu licked his lips. Even though he only had 4,000 cavalry, he was still very confident. As long as the South Ming Army dared to charge over, he wouldn't mind teaching them a lesson. Back to Lujua's troops. The 4 regiments under him had already prepared to defend all 4 sides, and were even prepared to attack at any moment. Yang Chendong's telegram had arrived. After reading the contents, although he was still a bit angry and thought that the 6th young master didn't believe in the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division, he couldn't go against military orders. He still ordered the entire army to defend and not attack. Reality quickly told him that listening to Yang Chendong's orders was the right thing to do. This was because Lujua quickly realized that there were more and more enemies surrounding him. Among them, there were also cavalrymen and Miao soldiers with Miao swords in their hands. When the scouts continuously retreated and information entered his ears, Lujua's expression finally changed. The number of enemies surrounding him had reached 100,000 infantry and 15,000 cavalry. This number greatly exceeded his expectations. He could imagine what would have happened if he had taken the initiative to attack. Perhaps the entire 1st Cavalry Division would have been annihilated here. Taking a deep breath, Wuxia calmed himself down. He shouted to the cavalry soldiers beside him, "Everyone, don't panic. The 6th young master already knows about the situation here. The 1st Cavalry Division is rushing over to provide reinforcements. As long as we can hold on for a while, we will be able to wait for reinforcements to arrive." When the name of the 6th young master was mentioned, it greatly boosted the morale of the entire division. In the eyes of the soldiers, Yang Chendong had already become an omnipotent existence. Since he already knew about the situation here, as long as they could hold on, they would definitely be able to find a chance to survive. Taking out their bows and arrows, and hanging their swords by the side of their horses, the 8,400 cavalry soldiers looked at the enemies coming from all directions with bright eyes. Everyone's eyes revealed the determination to fight to the end. Wu Yingtu and Rajiv, who surrounded them, had a slightly regretful expression on their faces. They were somewhat disappointed that the enemy did not take the initiative to attack. But what could they do? With their military strength that was more than 10 times that of the enemy, they were still confident that they could destroy the enemy. Fearing that undue delay would lead to more trouble, Wu Yingtu and Rajiv, who did not want to wait any longer, gave out orders at the same time. The army of more than 100,000 slowly advanced, constantly shrinking the encirclement. It seemed like they wanted to surround the 1st Cavalry Division and annihilate them here. In the face of absolute strength, any promises and tricks were futile. Neither side came up with such a plan. An hour later, when the distance between the two sides was less than 1 li, battle cries sounded from all directions. The infantry of the Southern Ming Army took the initiative to attack. Take turns to fire arrows. Try to preserve your strength and kill as many enemies as possible. Wuxia displayed the characteristics of an excellent general. In the face of a grim situation, not only was he not afraid, he was also very calm. Under his orders, wave after wave of arrows were shot out, landing in the midst of the charging enemy camp. Cries of pain and agony continuously sounded out. Less than 1 li away, the cavalry forcefully fired 5 waves of arrows. After killing about 1,000 enemies, the cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division began to move. Their warhorses galloped and collided with the charging soldiers of the Southern Ming Army. The smell of blood filled the air, giving off an unpleasant smell. This was destined to be a battle that could not be won. There were people everywhere, and under the impenetrable blockade, the cavalry's range of movement was constantly shrinking. Unable to use their strengths, the cavalry's advantage was greatly reduced, and the 1st Cavalry Division began to suffer casualties. Fortunately, the morale of the soldiers of the Southern Ming Army wasn't that high. When they charged forward with their advantage in numbers, and thought that they could drown the 1st Cavalry Division, they were met with a strong counterattack. Especially when the soldiers at the front were either killed by arrows or chopped into 2 by sharp sabers. When this terrifying scene appeared, the soldiers of the Southern Ming Army retreated, and their morale began to waver. Using this chance, the 1st Cavalry Division took a breather and once again shot out arrows, increasing their victory. Under Linchin City, 50,000 Southern Ming Army soldiers charged out from all directions. Contrary to his expectations, there were only 20,000 enemies. Unknowingly, 30,000 more had appeared. 4,000 against 50,000. A difference of more than 10 times, causing the pressure on the 1st Cavalry Division to increase. However, facing all of this, Division Commander Tian, who was not moved. In his eyes, enemies were meant to be killed. There was no difference between 1 enemy and 10 enemies. The war horses galloped and did not retreat. Tian, who was the tip of the arrow, leading dozens of cavalry to charge at the Southern Ming Army. At the same time, there were hundreds of other arrow formations. As the two sides clashed, corpses were strewn all over. This was the first time that the Southern Ming Army had seen the arrow formations. The moment they came into contact with them, they were stunned. When the formations broke through the momentum of the Southern Ming Army's charge and disrupted their formation, the enemy had no choice but to switch from offense to defense. Even so, they still suffered heavy casualties. If it weren't for the fact that they had the advantage in numbers, they might have already collapsed. Cavalry still had a lot of advantages over infantry, for example in terms of speed, strength and mobility. In addition, every soldier of the 1st Cavalry Division had been carefully selected. They were all experienced veterans who had gone through countless bloody battles. When they cooperated with each other and attacked with unparalleled speed and decisiveness, even more enemy corpses were left on the battlefield. Chapter 1060. In front of Yongji City, the bloody battle continued. After losing the first battle, 15,000 Bengali cavalry joined in and greatly suppressed the 1st Cavalry Division's counterattack. Both sides were cavalry, and even though the 1st Cavalry Division's fighting strength was stronger, they still showed signs of fatigue in the face of more and more energetic enemy cavalry. The 1st Cavalry Division's casualties began to increase. At the start, there were only a few dozen casualties, but now there were hundreds. This number was still increasing. After 8 hours of bloody battle, the sky had completely darkened. Thanks to the weather, the southern Ming army stopped attacking and only surrounded them. Using this opportunity, Wuxia ordered the soldiers to rest and reorganize. Then, countless soldiers jumped down from their horses with tired faces. It was also at this time that Wuxia, as the division commander, noticed that around 2,000 soldiers had died in battle, and 500 were seriously injured. The other soldiers were also injured. After knowing that more than a quarter of the soldiers had died, Wuxia's face became terrifyingly gloomy. He called over the telegraphist beside him and told him to report this situation to the 6th young master. At the same time, he added that he and the 1st Cavalry Division were prepared to fight to the last man. When Yang Qindong received this news, he was on the way to Linchin City with the Black Cavalry and the 7th Army. After reading the telegram, he put it aside. At this moment, he didn't know what to say. All he could do was silently rush. At the same time, he had a clearer understanding of King Guangtong. He also admitted that compared to other great Ming generals, this person knew more about the art of war. He admitted that he had underestimated this King Guangtong. Yang Qindong also hoped that the reinforcements sent by Tian Hu would arrive quickly and help the 1st Cavalry Division. In reality, Lu Duo and the other division commanders didn't delay along the way. After receiving the order, they rushed over from Linchin City. Even when they ate on their horses. During this time, they met many enemy soldiers who tried to stop them, but they were all defeated by their unstoppable momentum. When the sky was about to brighten, they were finally less than 50 li away from Yongji City. When the sky slowly brightened, the Bengali cavalry once again attacked. Not only that, but there were also 10,000 Miao soldiers working together with them. The Miao soldiers were able to survive until now because of their hard work. Facing the encirclement of the Ming army at all times, their fighting strength gradually increased. Compared to normal Ming soldiers, their performance on the battlefield was better and more ferocious. 10,000 Miao soldiers and 10,000 Bengali cavalry surged forward, showing that the southern Ming army was ready for the final battle. Facing this, Wuxia didn't have any intention of backing down. He personally led the cavalry forward. Although they didn't have the advantage in numbers, and their stamina wasn't as good as when they were at their peak after fighting for half a day, they had the confidence to survive. They had to persevere until the last moment when they couldn't hold on anymore. The battle continued, and lives could be lost at any time. The 1st Cavalry Division had more and more injured people, and the number of brothers who died also gradually increased. The team of 6,000 became 5,000, then 4,000. More than half of them had died, but there were still no reinforcements. Wuxia didn't know how many enemies he had killed. His body was covered in blood. Some of it was his, but most of it was the enemy's. Another half an hour passed, and the number of casualties around him had exceeded 1,000. He knew that if this continued, the remaining 3,000 people would all be sacrificed here in less than an hour. Could it be that there was really no hope? Just as this thought appeared in Wuxia's mind, a commotion came from the encirclement behind him. Then, a loud and familiar bugle sounded. This was the unique bugle call of the 5-star army when they were charging. When Lu Jue first heard it, he felt that this sound was so beautiful and pleasant to the ears. His entire body felt so comfortable. When he turned around, he saw the infantrymen of the Little South Ming army retreating to the sides like a tide. In the middle, a large number of cavalrymen were rushing in. It's the comrades of the 1st Cavalry Division. Our reinforcements are here. Retreat and quickly report back to the other side. Finally seeing hope, Lu Jue didn't know where he got the strength from. As he shouted loudly, his arms seemed to be filled with strength, allowing him to once again swing his sword to block the attack of the enemy cavalry in front of him. It was Lu Duo and the other 3 regiments of the 1st Cavalry Division's cavalry. They had rushed all the way here, and finally arrived at the last moment. Then, like a ferocious tiger, they charged towards the encirclement of the Southern Ming army. Under their valiance, no one was their match. Any soldier who had the courage to stand in front of Lu Duo and the others would quickly become a corpse lying on the cold ground. When more and more soldiers were killed on the ground, no one dared to take the brunt of the attack. A large path was opened, and the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division finally met up. Commander Lu, leave this to us. You take the brothers and retreat. The moment Lu Duo arrived, he took over the front line of defense of the 1st Cavalry Division. He led the 2nd Regiment to block the attack. The 3rd Regiment Commander Hu Bo was in the middle, and the 4th Regiment Commander Bai Shuang was at the back. They protected Lu Jue and the 3,000 injured cavalry as they retreated. The moment Lu Duo arrived, he quickly taught the opposing Bengali cavalry how to behave. As for the Miao soldiers who were wielding Miao blades, the brothers of the 1st Cavalry Division were either wielding a blade in one hand and a shield in the other, or wielding a blade in both hands. Only then did they understand why the enemy was called the 1st Cavalry Division, and how wrong it was to think that the 1st Cavalry Division was already very powerful. If you compare yourself to others, you'll die. If you compare goods, you'll throw them away. When Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment appeared, although there were only 2,000 people, they gave off the feeling that they were an army with thousands of men and horses. The first to suffer heavy losses were the Bengali cavalry. Because they were cavalry, they were used to being high and mighty. Normally, they would look down on the infantrymen. In their eyes, they were the strongest. However, just a day ago, 1st Cavalry Division taught them what to do, let them know what kind of disastrous price they would pay if they underestimated their opponent. They taught them that even though they were both cavalry, the difference in strength was like heaven and earth. They originally thought that the cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division was already very strong. After all, to be able to hold on for so long under the attack of so many infantrymen, and twice the number of cavalry was already very difficult. Seeing that the 1st Cavalry Division was about to be finished, their morale was about to collapse. If that was the case, they would only need one more charge to completely wipe out the enemy. However, another cavalry appeared, and the enemy's 2,000 cavalry dared to charge head-on. Looking at the close to 10,000 Miao soldiers and the countless Southern Ming soldiers around them, the Bengali cavalry laughed. They laughed. There were still people in this world who didn't know death. Did they really think that they were made of iron? A mere 2,000 people dared to attack an army of tens of thousands. Of course, they couldn't be spoiled. They immediately pulled out their horses and charged forward, holding their swords. They wanted to teach these new 5-star army cavalry how to write the word death. Then they indeed knew what the word death was. Unfortunately, they were the ones who died and not their opponents. Lu Duo and the others either had a sword and a shield, or 2 swords. They could both attack and defend. When they defended, they could defend themselves tightly. When they attacked, they could attack openly. Regardless of whether it was the speed, strength, or tricky angles of the swords, it was impossible for the enemy to catch up. Many cavalrymen were even knocked off their horses before they could see their opponents clearly. Under such a concentrated attack, once a cavalryman fell off his horse, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even if you weren't seriously injured, as long as you fell off your horse, there would be countless feet stepping on you. Even if you wanted to, you wouldn't be able to survive. With such great strength and speed, most of the Bengali cavalrymen were knocked off their horses in an instant. When this scene continued, the Bengali cavalrymen learned to be smart. They reined in their horses and intentionally retreated, leaving the battlefield to the other infantrymen. The second to be attacked were the Miao soldiers. They were at the front of the charge, and because of that, when the Bengali cavalrymen retreated, they became the vanguard of the charge. Fortunately, Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment started to slow down, as if to give them a chance to catch their breath. Then the 3rd Regiment came. Under the lead of their regiment commander Hu Bo, they launched a new charge, and the force of the charge slammed into the Miao soldiers. Blood splattered everywhere as blades flashed. Many of the Miao soldiers were sent flying by the force of the charge, while others were slashed in the head by the blades. In just a single exchange, hundreds of people had fallen. However, the charge was still ongoing, and there were still some cavalrymen from the 3rd Regiment that had not reached the front. Seeing the enemy's strength increasing, the Bengali cavalrymen retreating, and the surrounding Nanming soldiers retreating, the Miao soldiers could not take it anymore. Why should they be the ones to face the danger? They immediately began to retreat. This caused the Nanming soldiers, who seemed to have the upper hand, to be forced into a passive retreat. Don't charge anymore, everyone retreat, retreat. The 3rd Regiment Hu Bo had only killed 2 enemies, and the area in front of him was empty. He looked enviously at Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment, who was resting by the side. Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment was truly enjoying themselves. Regardless of whether his killing intent was satisfied or not, Hu Bo did not forget the main purpose of this mission. Since they had already met up with the 1st Cavalry Division, the next thing to do was to rescue them. This was not only the orders of their regiment commander, Tian Hu, but also the orders of the 6th Young Master. Chapter 1061. The 6th Young Master's orders were not to be disobeyed. Bai Shuang led the 4 regiments and retreated, with the 3,000 wounded soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division in the middle. Then Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment and Hu Bo's 3rd Regiment brought up the rear. The group successfully charged out of the encirclement and moved towards Liangshan shelter. Wu Yingtu and Ravji were only left with their backs. The world's 1st Cavalry Division continued to display their absolute strength and completed the mission of rescuing the 1st Cavalry Division. The remaining 2 regiments were led by Division Commander Tian, who engaged in a life-and-death battle with the 50,000 Southern Ming soldiers. 4,000 against 50,000, they naturally had a disadvantage in terms of numbers. But so what? This did not affect Tian Hu and the others in the slightest. Under his leadership, the formation at the tip of the arrow advanced, retreated, and advanced again as if it had entered a no-man's land. It went in and out 7 times. It was as valiant as Zhao Zilong on the yellow board slope. Teacher Tian Hu's dual blades could be said to be used exquisitely by him. Wherever he appeared, a long hole would be cut open. No one could come out from his left or right, and no one was his match. Anyone who dared to block in front of him would either die or be injured. Tian Hu led the 4,000 men of the 1st and 5th Regiments to block the attacks of the 50,000 Southern Ming soldiers. He demonstrated that the 1st Cavalry Division's reputation was earned through slashing and slashing. It was said that the strong were afraid of the unreasonable were afraid of the reckless, and the reckless were afraid of those who didn't care about their lives. Seeing that the 4,000 cavalrymen didn't care about their lives and continued to charge forward, the 50,000 soldiers of the Southern Ming army were terrified. After leaving behind close to 5,000 corpses, they slowly retreated. Even when the sky was completely dark, they didn't dare to take a step forward. In the end, we don't have enough troops. Looking at Linshan City that was just inches away, Tian Hu sighed. He only had 2 regiments and 4,000 men. It was extremely difficult to break through the layers of obstacles and enter the city. With a sigh, he could only wait. He would wait until dawn to find another way. Compared to Tian Hu, the Southern Ming soldiers were even more depressed. They had the advantage in numbers, and they were the ones on the attack. But why was it the other way around when it came to the battlefield? Instead, they had become the ones being beaten. If it wasn't for the fact that they had too many soldiers, and the number of 5-star army's cavalry was too small, perhaps a single attack would have destroyed their fighting spirit and caused them to be completely defeated. A few young southern Ming generals gathered together and offered suggestions. However, even after daybreak, they still couldn't find a better solution. At this time, the scouts at the front reported that the five-star army's reinforcements had appeared. They did not know how many soldiers there were, but there were both cavalry and infantry. They could not think of a better idea, and now that they heard that reinforcements were coming, the few generals immediately came to an agreement to retreat back to Linchin City. They would then report this matter to King Guangtong and listen to his orders for what to do next. The southern Ming army suddenly retreated back to the city at dawn, following which, Yang Qindong, Shifeng, 1,000 black cavalry and the 7th Army rushed over and met up with Tian Hu. "Are you okay?" "Sixth young master, we are fine. In the battle yesterday afternoon, we killed close to 5,000 men. 3 brothers died and 78 were injured." As soon as he saw Yang Qindong, Tian Hu immediately became a lot more spirited. Especially when he saw that Lu Qi, who came with him, was wearing a black weapon, he began to chuckle. "Not bad." Listening to the battlefield report, Yang Qindong nodded in satisfaction. The world's #1 cavalry division was indeed the #1 division. Even with 4,000 against 50,000, they were able to make the enemy not dare to move recklessly. Just based on this momentum alone, they were invincible. Of course, Yang Qindong also saw the light in Tian Hu's eyes. He smiled and patted his shoulder. "Give the 7th Army an hour to rest and then prepare to attack." "Okay." Hearing that the 6th young master was going to attack Linchin City, Tian Hu laughed out loud. With the 7th Army leading the way, it was time for the cavalry division to show off their heroism. An hour passed in the blink of an eye, following which, the various troops started to prepare for the attack. The 2 100mm mortars that came with the army were pushed to the front lines. They were adjusting the markers and aiming at the south gate of Linchin City. However, the plan didn't change quickly. Suddenly, the city gate opened and a small group of southern Ming troops appeared. "Sixth young master, we're ready. Should we fire now?" It was as if he didn't see the troops coming over. The 7th Army's commander, Tian Su, held his breath and asked. "Wait a moment." Yang Qindong looked at the diplomatic group with a face full of curiosity. What was going on? They hadn't even started fighting yet, and the other side was already backing down? Did they want to negotiate? The others were also shaken by the scene in front of them. What kind of situation was this? An army was pressing down on the border. Shouldn't it be the army that was sent? Why was it a diplomatic group? What was the enemy doing? Those who didn't understand turned their attention to Yang Qindong. They were used to listening to the 6th young master's orders. Especially when they didn't understand something, they had to listen to the 6th young master. This was because countless facts had proven that this person wouldn't make a wrong decision. However, this time, Yang Qindong was indeed confused by the situation in front of him. However, he didn't show any surprise or hesitation on the surface. Instead, he seemed to be sizing up the troops coming out of the city. In reality, he was observing and trying to figure out the other party's intentions. Without any orders, the cannons didn't fire, and the troops smoothly arrived at the front lines. When the two sides were less than 300 meters apart, they stopped. Then, a middle-aged man wearing a long robe walked out of the diplomatic group. The moment he appeared, Beta Persei's eyes widened. "Young master, we seem to have seen this person before." Nonsense, of course they had seen him before. The person who came was Chen Tian, the most eloquent person in the Little South Ming dynasty. Yang Qindong had met him once before. That was when they were dealing with the heavenly residence stockades Miao Jinlong, and he played the role of a lobbyist. However, he didn't expect to appear again. Could it be that they were really here for peace talks? Yang Qindong couldn't understand. The current situation was clearly in the Little South Ming dynasty's favor. Moreover, the fate of the surrounded 1st Cavalry Division was still unknown. Even if they wanted peace talks, he should be the one to suggest it. The other party had actually appeared. What was the meaning of this? Chen Tian didn't let Yang Qindong wait for long. Soon, he led a group of people to Yang Qindong, who was in the middle of the battle formation. Then he cupped his fists and bowed. In a very familiar manner he said, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, it's been a few years since we last met in Gaozhou. You're still as elegant as ever." Unable to understand what the other party was thinking, Yang Chendong maintained a polite smile. "Mr. Chen, you've come from afar. It must be a pleasure to meet you. Come please." He didn't show any doubt, as if he knew that Yang Chendong would come. Chen Tian's evaluation of Yang Chendong increased a little. He didn't show his emotions on his face. Under Yang Chendong's invitation, Chen Tian came to the main tent. Both parties sat down in the guest and host seats. Then Beta Persei served the dishes and stood behind Yang Chendong. He glared fiercely at Chen Tian, as if he would draw his sword and kill him if Chen Tian dared to make any rash moves. Usually, people who were eloquent and good at talking were not timid. Otherwise, if they were so scared that they couldn't speak when they saw their opponent, it would be a big mistake. For this reason, no matter how Beta Persei looked at him, Chen Tian remained calm and composed. He slowly tasted his tea and didn't forget to nod gently, as if he was praising the taste of the tea. Yang Chendong also slowly tasted his tea. He was not in a hurry to ask the other party's purpose for coming. He believed that since Chen Tian had come, he would definitely have something to say. Yang Chendong just waited silently. Sure enough, after a quarter of an hour, Chen Tian, who had drunk 2 cups of tea in a row, put down his teacup and looked at Yang Chendong. He seemed to be interested and asked, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, what do you think of the current situation?" Was he showing off or testing him? Yang Chendong knew that King Guangtong's sudden choice to target the 1st Cavalry Division was indeed beyond everyone's expectations. It also broke the pre-war plan he had set before the war, so he had no choice but to take action personally. "What, after taking a small advantage, you want to show off in front of me?" Although he felt a bit ashamed, Yang Chendong said without changing his expression, "Very good. Don't you see that the 5-star army has already surrounded Linchin City? If this king wants to, we should be able to break through the city quickly and kill our way to Nanning Prefecture. Alright, I heard that Zhu Huihua is there. Haha, just right, I can find him to drink some tea. It's a beautiful thing for 2 kings to meet." It seemed like he was talking about an extremely ordinary matter, but when Chen Tian heard these words, his expression couldn't help but turn ugly. First, the current situation was between Linchin City and Little Southern Ming Army. Whether it was in terms of territory or military strength, the 5-star army was at a disadvantage. It wasn't like what he said about breaking through the city. Second, regarding Yang Chendong's identity as Bugnam of Gojoseon, it was only a reward from the imperial court. Until now, neither Little Southern Ming Army nor Little Southern Ming Army had publicly acknowledged it. Thus, the so-called meeting between 2 kings was naturally impossible. Chen Tian chuckled as he thought about how thick-skinned and black-hearted Yang Chendong was. He didn't refute Yang Chendong directly, because he wanted to wait for Yang Chendong to ask him why he was laughing. Then he would remind Yang Chendong that this would play an important role in the upcoming negotiations. However, some things didn't necessarily develop according to plan. Just like now, there was an extra person outside the door. It was the telegrapher, Wang Shan. When he sent the 2 telegrams to Beta Persei and arrived in Yang Chendong's hands, he only took a cursory glance and raised his eyebrows. After a moment of silence, he whispered something in Beta Persei's ear. Then Beta Persei nodded and left. Only Yang Chendong and Chen Tian were left in the main tent. At this moment, Yang Chendong didn't speak, nor did he ask him what he was laughing about. Chapter 1062. Chen Tian did not go according to plan. He was still thinking of how to change the topic so that Yang Chendong could see the situation clearly and listen to his analysis of the pros and cons. Only then would he be able to come up with a suggestion. Just as he was thinking of how to say it without losing his status and making Yang Chendong grateful, the sound of cannons suddenly rang out outside the tent. It shocked Chen Tian, who was not prepared at all, so much so that he threw the teacup in his hand to the ground. Chen Tian was indeed a courageous person to dare to appear in the 5-star army's camp at this moment. However, this did not prove that he was not afraid of death. Especially when the cannons suddenly rang out, it was completely out of his expectations. This kind of shock made him reveal his cowardly nature. Yang Chendong saw Chen Tian's actions, but did not make any comments because he knew that this was just the beginning. After throwing the teacup in a panic, Chen Tian knew that he had lost his composure and made a fool of himself. However, he did not care so much at this moment. Instead, he sat up straight and anxiously asked, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, what's with the cannons?" "Oh, nothing's wrong. They are only bombarding Linchin City." "Right. Didn't this king just say that we have already surrounded the city? We've already surrounded this place. Attacking the city is just a matter of time." Yang Chendong had a smile on his face, as if he was talking about a trivial matter. But in Chen Tian's eyes, that was not the case at all. He was already here as a negotiator, so why did the 5-star army still want to attack? What position did they want to place him in? Also, Linchin City was one of the bargaining chips in the upcoming negotiations. If it was attacked now, wouldn't that mean that there was one less condition? As a negotiator, he definitely could not let such a thing happen. Bugnam of Gojoseon, as a negotiator of the Southern Ming Empire, I request you to immediately stop attacking Linchin City. Southern Ming Empire? I'm afraid you can't represent it. At most, you can only represent your master, Little Southern Ming. Yang Chendong chuckled. His tone was filled with disdain. No. I can represent Bugnam of Gojoseon, and tell him the truth. My master has already sided with Nanming, and is now a member of Nanming. Bugnam of Gojoseon is now bombarding Linchin City. Does he want to fall out with Nanming and rebel? Yang Chendong was taken aback by Chen Tian's words. There was too much information, so much so that Yang Chendong had to consider it carefully. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he digested the information first before looking at Chen Tian. Yang Chendong asked, "Who is your master referring to?" "Of course it's King Guangtong." "Humph, Zhu Huilu is not satisfied with the title of Minzhuang Prince. He even calls himself Little Nanming Prince. This is treacherous. How can I associate with such a person?" Chen Tian's face was filled with righteousness and disdain. If Chen Tian hadn't spoken to him on behalf of Zhu Huilu, Yang Chendong would have believed him. It seemed that Chen Tian had given up on Zhu Huilu and sided with Zhu Huilu. In that case, the latter was Zhu Qizhan of Ying's sect who had sided with Nanming. This was the first time he heard of this news and he was shocked. Zhu Huilio's rise had increased the internal friction of Nanming. They had no time to care about other things. Yang Chendong could then stir up trouble in the south, expand his territory, and increase his strength. In fact, Zhu Huilu didn't disappoint him. He called himself Little Nanming Prince and attracted the hatred of Nanming. Even after being attacked by Nanming and King Shiping from both sides, he still persisted. Now he had joined forces with the Bengal army and defeated King Shiping. He showed that he wanted to compete with Nanming as an equal. If he hadn't provoked Yang Chendong this time, he might have been able to achieve a certain level of success. Seeing that the situation was good, why did King Guangtong suddenly side with Nanming? Did that mean that he had fallen out with Little Nanming Prince and his brother Zhu Huilu? That's right, it was recorded in history that the two brothers didn't get along in the end and parted ways. But in this case, Zhu Qizhan of Ying's sect really had the strength to rule the entire Nanming. In addition to strengthening himself, he would naturally pose a certain threat to the 5-star army. In a very short time, Yang Chendong thought of a lot. While analyzing the pros and cons, he also thought about what he should do to gain the most benefits. So much so that he didn't hear Chen Tian calling him several times. Bugnam of Gojoseon, Bugnam of Gojoseon. The hurried greeting finally broke Yang Chendong's contemplation. He raised his head and looked at Chen Tian. Chen Tian said anxiously, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, now I'm here to negotiate with you on behalf of Nanming. Shouldn't you stop firing the cannons first to show your sincerity?" Sincerity? Hearing this, Yang Chendong laughed, then suddenly changed his expression and said, "You still have the nerve to talk about sincerity with me? Previously, you sent troops to my Liangshan shelter for no reason, took away more than 40,000 people, and killed thousands of my soldiers. When I brought people to have a good talk with you, you directly surrounded my 1st Cavalry Division, causing them to be heavily injured and almost completely wiped out. Is this your sincerity?" The situation of the 1st Cavalry Division that Yang Chendong mentioned was one of the 2 telegrams that he had just received from Wangshan. It clearly recorded the fact that Luju's 1st Cavalry Division was only left with 3,000 people, and almost everyone was injured. It could be imagined that if it wasn't for Lu Duo and the other 2 commanders arriving in time, it was not impossible for them to be completely wiped out. How could he not take revenge for such a huge grudge? The second telegram said that the 100,000 foreign invaders had already taken down the Xisha residence and had either killed or captured the 20,000 Nanming soldiers there. It also said that they were rushing towards Linchin City and would listen to his orders. After receiving this news, Yang Chendong had the confidence to take revenge. With the 100,000 foreign invaders, he was confident that he could fight a few rounds with King Guangtong and determine the victor. How was it possible for him to stop at this moment? Yang Chendong suddenly became angry and scolded him for not being sincere. Chen Tian found that he had nothing to say. He who could be unreasonable and sly, didn't know what to say at this moment. Without waiting for Chen Tian to think about what to say, Yang Chendong said, "You said that you are the envoy of the Nanming Empire. Do you think I will believe you? Who doesn't know that you were the advisor of the rebel little Nanming King Zhu Huixin? What? Now that you know the power of our 5-star army, you want to talk? Let me tell you, it's too late. Men, bring Mr. Chen away to rest, don't disturb him." Yes. Qiu Vi, Ba Daojiang, Peng Yu and the others who were waiting outside entered the tent. They didn't give Chen Tian any chance to speak, and directly brought him away. The tent quickly quieted down. Beta Persei strode to Yang Chendong's side and lowered his voice as much as possible. "Young master, if Zhu Huixin really defected to the Nanming Empire, what should we do? Are we not going to take revenge for the 1st Cavalry Division?" "Who said we're not going to take revenge?" Yang Chendong looked up at Beta Persei and asked. But if we take action against Zhu Huixin now, isn't that the same as declaring war against the Nanming Empire? Young master, have you made preparations?" Beta Persei was confused. "What preparations? Who said that Zhu Huixin defected to the Nanming Empire? Do you have any concrete evidence?" Yang Chendong asked. "Ah. In that case this matter is fake and Chen Tian is spouting nonsense." Beta Persei seemed to have realized something and answered. "It doesn't look like it." Unexpectedly, Yang Chendong shook his head at this moment. Although a person like Chen Tian was extremely eloquent, he wouldn't dare to make such a big lie. After all, this matter was of great importance, and the consequences were not something he could bear. Therefore, it was very likely that this matter was true, but it hadn't been announced yet. Since it hadn't been announced, this was Yang Chendong's opportunity. As if thinking of something, Yang Chendong called Beta Persei and whispered, "Send a telegram to Yang San and Yang Lu to confirm the authenticity of this matter. Also, inform Yao Ingjun to immediately spread the news that Zhu Huixin has defected to the Nanming Empire." What Yang Chendong wanted was to make use of the time difference, and the fact that the telegram could be spread without any hindrance. He wanted Zhu Huixin to be prepared and guard against his brother, so that he wouldn't be harmed. As long as this person didn't die, little Nanming's power wouldn't be disintegrated, and could still play a role in restraining Nanming. He could use this time to solve more problems in Southeast Asia. Beta Persei nodded, and went to arrange for Wang Shan to send the report. Yang Chendong didn't stay in the tent. Instead, he went out of the tent and came to the side of the cannons. He shouted, "Boom! Aim at the city gate and blast it with all your might. Division Commander Tian Hu, Division Commander Tian Su, get ready to attack the city. This time we must take down Linchin City." Before, Yang Chendong only wanted to pressure the other party and tell them that he wasn't someone to be trifled with. Now he really wanted to take down Linchin City. On one hand, he wanted to take revenge for the 1st Cavalry Division. On the other hand, he wanted to make use of the time difference to gain more benefits. After the 6th young master gave the order, the cannoneers didn't hold back and fired one after another. Very quickly, Linchin City's walls were filled with holes and the thick city gate was completely destroyed. Using this opportunity, Division Commander Tian Hu, who had been waiting by the side, unsheathed his blades and led 2 regiments of the 1st Cavalry Division into the city. Behind them were thousands of soldiers from the 7th Army. When Chen Tian walked out of Linchin City, He promised his subordinates that he would definitely make the 5-star army stop attacking the city, so that they wouldn't have to worry. Because of this, the soldiers guarding the city let down their guard. Even when the cannons sounded, although some people were shocked, some people still said that it was just the 5-star army trying to scare people, and that there was no need to be afraid. Chapter 1063. But now, even the city gates had been blasted open by the cannons, and the cavalry had entered the city. Finally, the soldiers were afraid. The resistance they formed in their panic was not Tianhu's match at all, and they could not stop the powerful cavalry from killing their way in. In addition, the Lu 7th Division followed closely behind and fired bullets as if they were free. Very quickly, a path of blood was carved out and the morale of the South Ming army was crushed. It seemed that Zhu Huihua had led 300,000 troops and defeated Shiping Wangmubin. He had taken in tens of thousands of soldiers, and had the advantage in numbers. However, having a large number of soldiers did not mean that they were elite soldiers. Most of these soldiers were made up of peasants, and they had not even undergone proper military training. It was still possible to rely on them to fight a smooth battle, but if they were to fight a fierce battle, they would not be a match at all. Once the fighting spirit was in chaos, it would be like monkeys scattering when the tree falls, and all of them would run away. When they entered the city, they met with some effective resistance. However, under the fierce attacks of Tianhu and the 2 cavalry regiments, they were quickly destroyed. Following this, they did not meet any decent resistance. The tens of thousands of soldiers fled if they could and surrendered if they could not. In just half a day, Linchin City had been taken over by the 5-star army. After taking down Linchin City, they had opened the door to the Nanning Prefecture. As long as the 5-star army continued to attack, they would be able to fight Guangtong Wang Zhu Huihua in close combat. However, Yang Chendong did not choose to do so. He had limited troops and what he needed to do now was wait. Wait for Lu Duo's 3 cavalry regiments and the 1st Cavalry Division to return. Wait for the 100,000 foreign races to gather. If everything was prepared and there was still time, he would not mind teaching Zhu Huihua a lesson, and let him know that there were some people that he could not offend. Yao Yingjun walked on the streets of the Guizhou residence. As usual, he would go to the tea house to listen to music and drink tea. His life was very carefree. However, today, after he came out of the tea house, he had a look of anxiousness on his face. Speaking of which, there was only one matter. He had just received news from his intelligence team that Zhu Huichen, the Prince of Guangtong, had defected to the Southern Ming Imperial Court. News by telegram was always the fastest. Yao Yingjun was sure that no one in the Guizhou division knew about this. At the very least, Zhu Huihua, the self-proclaimed Prince of Little Nanming, did not know. Otherwise, the streets would not be so quiet. Yao Yingjun was sure that he was not the only one who knew about this matter. However, the main character, Zhu Huihua, should not know about it. Could it be that, when he thought about the possibility that the patrolling soldiers on the streets were related to Prince Guangtong, Zhu Huihua, perhaps he had already bribed the people around Prince Lil, Nanming and was prepared for this? Was there going to be a mutiny? When he thought of the mutiny, the first thing that came to Yao Yingjun's mind was Zhu Lian's pitiful appearance. Zhu Lian, the younger sister of Zhu Huilu and Zhu Huilu, was titled Eternal Victory Princess. In the beginning, Yao Yingjun was able to infiltrate their inner circle by relying on Zhu Lian's love for him. He used this relationship to complete the mission of understanding and investigating the higher-ups of Prince Guangtong and the others. Initially, he thought that the mission wouldn't last too long. However, he didn't expect that he would stay for several years. Humans were emotional creatures. After a long time, it was inevitable that they would fall in love with each other. In particular, Zhu Lian was really good to Yao Yingjun. That was 100% trust. She appeared to resolve several crises. Over time, Yao Yingjun realized that he had fallen in love with her. After recognizing his feelings, Yao Yingjun was really scared. As an intelligence officer, the most basic rule was to learn how to act according to the situation. One shouldn't easily believe others, and shouldn't easily reveal one's true feelings. Obviously, Yao Yingjun had already violated these rules. It was because of this that he didn't report this matter. Instead, he suppressed this feeling in his heart and didn't tell anyone. Now that he knew that Zhu Huihua might want to rebel, and that Zhu Lian might also be implicated, he became even more anxious. He had to protect this girl's safety, but he couldn't reveal his own details. How could he do this? Perhaps Yao Yingjun could casually find a reason, such as going out to play. This way, he could justifiably leave the Guizhou department with Zhu Lian. But if he really did this, what would happen to Zhu Huilu? This was tantamount to openly resisting the mission. Once the higher-ups held him responsible, even if he had several heads, it wouldn't be enough to cut off. But if he didn't use this reason, did he have to reveal his identity? After thinking for a long time, Yao Yingjun felt a headache. In the end, he decided to target Meng Neng and Duan Yuhong. Not only were these two people trusted by the Prince of Lil, Nanming, but they also had their own abilities. For example, Duan Yuhong, who was known for his strange skills, and Meng Neng, who was known for his bravery, could be compared to Chen Tian, who was known for his eloquence, or even better. Of these two people, one was deeply trusted by Prince Guangtong, and had to consult him for almost everything he did. Meng Neng was in charge of the military power of Prince Guangtong. If Zhu Huilu wanted to cause his brother to rebel, Meng Neng definitely couldn't avoid it. Looking at the extra patrolling soldiers on the street, Yao Yingjun had a feeling that General Meng Neng might have been bribed. But he still decided to give it a try. This was how intelligence agents worked. Even if there was a 1% chance, they would still try their best, even if they had to pay the price with their lives. Because of his relationship with Zhu Lian, Yao Yingjun was once a guest of Meng Neng and Duan Yuhong. He didn't need to make an appointment to see them. He just walked in. As someone who had been to the general's residence more than once, Yao Yingjun's intuition told him that there was something wrong with this place. Before he joined the intelligence agency, he had undergone special physical training. Although Yao Yingjun's skills weren't as good as Lung Feng's, he was still much stronger than ordinary people. His eyesight was also better than ordinary people. The moment he entered the general's residence, he could feel the shadows in the dark. There were countless pairs of eyes staring at him. Yao Yingjun didn't look around. He acted as if he didn't notice anything. The moment he entered the general's residence, he shouted that he wanted to see General Meng Neng, and that he wanted to have a good fight with him. Naturally, his shouts attracted the attention of many people in the residence. Go, tell him that I'm patrolling the barracks and am not in the residence. In a dark corner of the courtyard, General Meng Neng's face revealed a hint of displeasure when he saw Yao Yingjun come uninvited. The housekeeper received the order and hurriedly went out to welcome Yao Yingjun. He used the excuse that the general was not in the residence and had gone to the barracks to persuade Yao Yingjun to leave. Soon, the housekeeper returned to Meng Neng's side and asked softly, "General, could he have sensed something?" He's just a gigolo. In the future, he won't even have the ability to be the head of the household. How could he have sensed something? All right, let's hurry up and prepare. We'll take action tomorrow night. Meng Neng sneered. It was obvious that Yao Yingjun's usual disguise was effective. He was not treated like a piece of cake and reduced the possibility of being suspected. After leaving the general's residence, Yao Yingjun's unruly appearance was completely hidden. After hesitating for a moment, he headed straight for the Duan residence. Compared to the Duan residence in the past, Yao Yingjun saw that there were many more strangers in the surrounding alleys and streets. With his identity as a spy, he quickly noticed that something was different. If he guessed correctly, this place was being watched. It was very likely that it was Meng Neng's doing. He had already shown his face at the general's residence once, and was almost forced to stay there. If he took the risk to appear at the Duan residence again, he was afraid that it would really arouse suspicion. For safety reasons, he didn't enter the Duan residence. Instead, he returned to the tea house. Since he couldn't get through to the higher-ups, he might as well start from the bottom. That was to spread rumors of Zhu Huitu's rebellion. As for how effective it would be, he wasn't sure. But other than that, what else could he do? Although he seemed to have a good relationship with some people because of his relationship with Zhu Lian, when it came to big matters, who would treat him like a piece of cake? When he left the tea house, Yao Yingjuan's footsteps were clearly faster. He didn't know what Meng Neng would do in the face of the rumors that would spread throughout the city. He didn't want to gamble, so the best thing to do was to bring Zhu Lian to a safe place to hide. 2 hours after Yao Yingjun left the tea house, the streets of Guizhou province began to spread rumors that Zhu Huitu, the prince of Guangdong, had sided with the southern Ming dynasty and was about to rebel. With the intelligence department's spies, the news quickly spread through the streets and alleys. It also spread to the general's residence and the prince of Little Nanming's residence. Who is it? Who leaked the news? Meng Neng said angrily after hearing the news. He had already made plans for the rebellion tomorrow night. Who would have thought that the news would be leaked? It seemed that everything had to change. General, the king has ordered you to make a trip to the prince's residence. Just as Meng Neng called the housekeeper over to discuss countermeasures, a servant reported that the prince of Little Nanming wanted to see him. General, you should bring more people with you. The housekeeper said worriedly. Of course. I wanted to do this secretly. Since it's like this, I might as well make it public. I'll go see the king now. You guys follow the plan and attack the other officials. Meng Neng wouldn't wait for death. Since he had promised Zhu Huitu to rebel with him, he couldn't go back on his word. Meng Neng made his move. Everything had been prepared long ago. The only difference was that one would take action tomorrow night, while the other would take action earlier. Because Meng Neng's actions were fast enough, the prince of Little Nanming, Zhu Huitu, was still caught by the rebels despite being prepared for it. It wasn't just Zhu Huitu. His other brother, the prince of Yangzhong, Duan Yuhong, and the others were also caught. The only one who was surprised was Princess Yongsheng. When a large group of soldiers entered the princess' residence, they found out that she wasn't there. She had gone out with Yao Yingjun to play chase. A group of soldiers immediately went out of the city to chase. However, since Yao Yingjun was prepared, how could he be caught? Not to mention, he didn't even leave the city. Instead, he took Zhu Lian to a safe place to hide. Other than Zhu Lian and a few lucky officials and generals who weren't in the city, most people were controlled by Meng Neng. At this point, it was announced that they had changed positions and returned to the southern Ming court. Chapter 1064. The forces of the Little Nanming king, who was once viewed as a great enemy by the southern Ming dynasty, had collapsed just like that. Everything happened so quickly that it shocked many people. Yang Chendong used the advantage of the radio station to receive this news before anyone else. However, he only sighed. It was hard to guard against a thief in one's own home. After that, he no longer cared about it and began to focus on the negotiations in front of him. He had to pay attention to it. For this negotiation, the southern Ming dynasty had actually sent the crown prince's tutor and minister of war Kuang Yi to Linchin City. It was said that the diplomatic group was less than 30 li away and would arrive before nightfall. Young Master, Division Commander Lu Zhua and Lu Zhuatuan have returned. Beta Persei softly walked to Yang Chendong's side. Where is the foreign allied army? Yang Chendong asked as he nodded slightly. They should be able to reach Linchin City by tomorrow afternoon. Beta Persei estimated and replied. Beta Persei, do you think the foreign allied army is reliable? Due to what happened in the Guizhou division, Yang Chendong couldn't help but be suspicious. From the current situation, the rise of the five-star army was inevitable. It would be extremely difficult for others to defeat them. However, if something similar happened in the Guizhou division, it would be hard to say. Since there was a precedent, they had to be careful. Young Master, do you have any ideas? Beta Persei couldn't answer. But his habit told him that since he asked such a question, the young master must have a solution. How about this in the future? If the foreign allied army's soldiers perform meritorious deeds, they will be directly promoted to the reserve division. This way, if the cold front lacks soldiers, they won't have to re-evaluate them and can directly choose from the reserve division. Yang Chendong hesitated for a moment before speaking in an extremely confident tone. They had a reserve division before, but as the cold front continued to expand, they didn't have enough soldiers and had to temporarily withdraw this division. Now that a large number of non-humankind youngsters had joined the army, it was time for the army to recover. Okay, I'll do it right away. After understanding Yang Chendong's meaning, Beta Persei nodded heavily. He used to be the commander of a logistics division, which was equivalent to a concentration of soldiers. Therefore, he was quite experienced in this aspect. As for the selection of the division commander, the military department would decide on it, and the political department would review it. If there were no problems, it would be reported to the young master. Using people as a mirror, one can understand gains and losses. Using history as a mirror, one can understand the rise and fall of a nation. Since Yang Chendong knew where the others lost, he naturally wouldn't allow the same problem to happen to himself. That night, the north gate of Linshan City opened. Beta Persei, Tianhu Tiansu, and the others welcomed the Southern Ming special envoy into the city. In the back hall of the Yamen, Yang Chendong ordered people to prepare good wine and dishes for Kuang Yi. Speaking of Kuang Yi, Yang Chendong wasn't unfamiliar with him. Especially when they first met, this person's reputation and influence were above his. Only a few years had passed, and now the status of the two of them had undergone earth-shattering changes. Although Kuang Yi had also taken a small step forward, going from a second-rank official to a lower first-rank official, compared to Yang Chendong who had a different surname, the difference was not small. When they first met, Kuang Yi had no choice but to bow and say, "Special Envoy Kuang Yi greets Bugnam of Gojoseon." "Haha, Minister Kuang, there's no need for such formalities between us. Come have a seat." Yang Chendong chuckled. Yang Chendong's enthusiasm was the true reason why Zhu Qizhen had sent Kuang Yi. He wanted to use this friendship to play the emotional card. After the two sides sat down, Yang Chendong asked about Guaning while urging them to drink. Back then, Guaning was only a fifth-rank official. However, it was said that he had become a great general of the Southern Ming Empire, and was promoted to a second-rank general. Moreover, he was trusted by Zhu Qizhen. Kuang Yi naturally didn't hide anything from him. Not only did he talk about Guan Ying's current situation, he also said that Guaning missed Bugnam of Gojoseon a lot. If he wasn't on official business, he would have also come to visit. The atmosphere at the beginning of the banquet was good. The two sides only talked about old times and didn't talk about official matters. However, after 3 rounds of wine, the banquet ended and tea was served. The two people's expressions couldn't help but become more serious. In the end, it was Kuang Yi who couldn't help but speak first. "Bugnam of Gojoseon, Guangdong King Zhu Huixin has already surrendered to Emperor Yingzong. The era of the Southern Ming Empire will be gone forever. What do you think? Emperor Yingzong has made a good move. This king is impressed." Yang Chendong said with a fake smile. "Yes, my king is wise. The existence of the Southern Ming Empire has caused the commoners to lose their homes. Who knows how many people have lost their homes because of it? They indeed deserve to die," Kuang Yi also said with a look of admiration. As he spoke, he observed Yang Chendong as if he wanted him to express his admiration. Unfortunately, Yang Chendong's expression was normal. However, in Kuang Yi's eyes, he felt that this was very normal. Compared to the matter of Zhu Qizhen wiping out the little South Ming imperial court, what Yang Chendong and the 5-star army did was a huge matter. If one had to compare, the former was just a small fight in one's own garden. However, Yang Chendong had already displayed his fists and kicks outside, showing the might of the Han Empire. However, the 5-star army's strength was a bit too strong. They were so strong that their achievements had already shocked the emperor. Some people even said in private that if the 5-star army turned around one day, neither Bai Ming nor the Southern Ming Empire would be able to stop them. Unless the Great Ming Empire was reunited, they would be able to suppress the 5-star army. Of course, some people thought that they were smart. If one didn't understand the 5-star army, they wouldn't know how strong they were. If one hadn't truly fought with them, they wouldn't know how terrifying their battle strength was. It was a pity that some people could only see the small piece of land in front of them, but they always emphasized how high their vision was. It was laughable just thinking about it. Kuang Yi naturally wasn't a short-sighted person. He had already seen how powerful Yang Chendong was a few years ago. However, he didn't think that this person would develop so quickly. He had already taken over almost half of the Great Ming Empire's territory outside of the Great Ming Empire. It was also because of this that he strongly advocated for quickly destroying the Southern Ming Empire and unifying the Southern Ming Empire first. Then he would see if there was an opportunity to swallow Beiming. Only then would the Great Ming Empire be united and be able to work together to resist a powerful enemy. Of course, Kuang Yi wouldn't say these thoughts to Yang Qindong. At this time, he only said that the emperor was wise and wanted to unify the Southern Ming Empire first. In fact, there were some things that Yang Qindong could guess even if Kuang Yi didn't say it. Seeing Kuang Yi first flatter the emperor's brilliance, and then bemoan the state of the universe and pity the fate of mankind as he spoke of the suffering of the common people, he chuckled and said, "So it seems that the emperor and minister Kuang place great importance on the quality of life of the common people. Then, I wonder how the lives of the common people in the Southern Ming dynasty have changed compared to before? Or rather, after the Southern Ming Empire's power was returned to the imperial court, what kind of preferential treatment did you give the common people?" Yang Qindong asked with the common people as the topic. He wouldn't forget that in the future, there were people who said that foreigners had a higher status than ordinary officials in the country. Because of this, they didn't have to abide by the laws of the country. Once something happened, they would put pressure on the embassy and use their bad international reputation as an excuse to show their nobility. It was because of this that Yang Qindong intentionally raised the status of Han people. He wanted the entire world to form a habit from this moment onwards. A habit that the Han people were high above and inviolable. Yang Qindong could do what he said because Yangshi started from scratch and instilled the idea of the supremacy of the Han people. The Southern Ming Empire couldn't do it. Or rather, the entire Great Ming Empire couldn't do it. The Great Ming Empire was like the feudal dynasties of the past. It was born in troubled times and paid attention to the inheritance of a family. It paid attention to the rule of the world through literature. This was why the status of the scholars in the Great Ming Empire was constantly rising. Thinking about it carefully, why were the scholars and officials so high in status? Wasn't it because they stepped on others to get to where they were? For example, the merchants, soldiers, and most importantly, the common people under their feet. For a country full of Han people, it wasn't realistic to talk about raising the status of the common people. It wasn't like Yang Xie, who conquered all kinds of places and placed Han people in them to show their high status. As the saying goes, without comparison, there is no hierarchy. Thus, even if the Southern Ming Empire was thinking for the common people, it couldn't be raised like the Han people in Yang Xie. Not to mention, the Southern Ming Empire's attitude towards the common people, especially those at the lowest level, had always been indifferent. How could they raise their status and treatment like Yang Qindong said? Kuang Ye's face turned red at Yang Qindong's question. He slowly lowered his head and said, "The common people are the people under the emperor's rule. Of course, we have to treat them better." The two words represented Yang Qindong's current mood. Fortunately, he knew that with the Southern Ming Empire's current situation, it was impossible for them to treat the common people better. He simply didn't care about this question and changed his tone. "This time, Zhu Huichun was willing to surrender to you. What benefits did he give you?" Normally, this was a private matter of the Southern Ming Empire, so it wasn't good for others to question it. However, Kuang Yi knew that with Yang Qindong's power, if he wanted to know the inside story, even if he didn't say it himself, he would be able to find out from others. Most importantly, this matter was going to be revealed to the world soon, so it was impossible to hide it. Thus he directly said, "The emperor made Zhu Huichun the prince of the 3 provinces. He will be in charge of the military of Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guizhou." The prince of the 3 provinces. After Yang Qindong heard this, he nodded and said, "Only in charge of military affairs, not local government, right?" Chapter 1065. Kuang Yi didn't expect Yang Qindong to be so smart and be able to see the crux of the problem at a glance. He nodded. Bugnam of Gojoseon is right. He only has military power and no financial power. Once he offends the emperor and cuts off his provisions, I'm afraid it will be difficult for him to command any army. What a wishful thinking. Yang Chendong exposed Zhu Qizhen's thoughts while chatting. Kuang Ye's face turned red again. Yang Chendong was speaking the truth. This time, Zhu Huihua was indeed deceived by Zhu Qizhen. Not explaining was equivalent to admitting it. Yang Chendong couldn't help but ask with interest. This explanation isn't very clever. If this prince can see it, others can also see it. Does the king of the 3 provinces not have any objections? Yes, but His Majesty allowed him to trade with the kingdom of Banga. Apart from handing over 30% of the profits to the imperial court, he could keep the rest for himself. Kuang Yi didn't hide any deep secrets either, so he spoke with a straight face. Trade with the Bengal army? Yang Chendong was a little surprised, but after thinking about it he understood. Zhu Huihua had replaced his elder brother Zhu Huihua's position. If he still controlled the military and political power of the 3 provinces, it would be no different from the previous Little Southern Ming. This was something that Zhu Qizhen couldn't tolerate. It was because of this that both sides took a step back. One side wanted military power, while the other side wanted administrative and financial power. This was equivalent to each side taking what they needed. He sighed in his heart. It was a good plan. However, there was a prerequisite for all of this. For example, whether he agreed, whether Yang Xie agreed, and whether the 5-star army agreed. The 3 provinces were close to the Yunnan province. If they didn't deal with Yang Chendong, there wouldn't be peaceful days here. Needless to say, the Southern Ming Empire's food and the goods that the 3 provincial kings would trade with would have to rely on Yang Chendong. This was the main reason why they had sent Chen Tian and Kuang Yi to negotiate. Finally knowing the truth, Yang Chendong was no longer anxious. Now that it was someone else who needed his help, he could take his time to think about it. Therefore, he didn't take the initiative to ask questions, and instead allowed Kuang Yi to speak. After seeing that Yang Chendong didn't have anything to ask, Kuang Yi opened his mouth as expected. The first thing that came out of his mouth was His Majesty's words. As if everything was His Majesty's will, and he was just a messenger. If Yang Chendong had any opinions or questions, he would be responsible for conveying them, but he couldn't make the decision. It was no wonder that Kuang Yi was so careful. It was said that a weak country had no diplomacy. Besides, Yang Chendong was completely different from the one he met a few years ago. Now that the Southern Ming dynasty had a favor to ask of them, how could they not speak some soft words? Bugnam of Gojoseon, His Majesty said that as long as you agree to this decision, our Southern Ming Empire will publicly recognize your title as Bugnam of Gojoseon. This is a king with a different surname. Other than a few people who were conferred the title when Taizu was still alive, only King Shiping is left. This honor is so great and so high. Bugnam of Gojoseon, His Majesty also said that the Liangshan shelter is allowed to exist. As long as you don't steal or rob, and the people can enter the shelter, we will turn a blind eye and pretend that we didn't see anything. Bugnam of Gojoseon, His Majesty also said. Next, Kuang Yi represented Zhu Qizhen of the Ying sect and made promises again and again. Yang Chendong became a listener, but he just sat there and didn't say anything. After about half an hour, everything that needed to be said was said. Kuang Yi looked at Yang Chendong and asked in a low voice, Bugnam of Gojoseon, what do you think? This wasn't the first time he said this. It was enough to prove that Yang Chendong's position in Kuang Ye's heart was very important and high. However, Yang Chendong still didn't say anything, as if he was asleep. Under Kuang Ye's continuous questioning, Yang Chendong raised his head as if he had just woken up from a dream and said, This is far from enough. I'm afraid that Minister Ching still doesn't know that 2 or 3 days ago, the 5-star Army's 1st Cavalry Division was surrounded by Zhu Huilu, who killed many of our soldiers. If we don't take revenge, how can we convince the public? But at that time, the 3 provincial kings hadn't become part of the Southern Ming Empire. Now he's already one of His Majesty's people. Kuang Yi wanted to explain more, but Yang Chendong said, Yes, it's because I know that he's now one of the Southern Ming Empire's people that I didn't do anything to them. I just wanted to see what Minister Chung would say. Now it seems that your sincerity is far from enough. Not enough? Kuang Yi understood the meaning behind his words. It wasn't that he couldn't, but that it wasn't enough. That meant that there was still room for discussion. He asked curiously, "But does King Nanwu have any other requests?" "You can make the decision?" "No, I can pass on King Nanwu's request to His Majesty. At the same time, I will do my best to help." Kuang Yi didn't dare to say too much. "All right, since Minister Cheng is so sincere, this prince might as well say a few things." Yang Chendong knew that the time was right. It was time for him to speak. He immediately mentioned that he was interested in the Southern Ming Empire's silk, tea leaves, and porcelain. He was interested in some masters and wanted to hire them to work in Crimson City at a high price. At the same time, he wanted to buy a certain percentage of the goods at cost price, and then sell them to merchants from other countries under the name of Crimson City. It was said that Suhong's silk was of the best quality. Crimson City also spent some effort to imitate it, but unfortunately, the results weren't very good despite investing a lot of manpower and resources. For this, City Lord Yu Qian had represented the local factories to ask Yang Chendong more than once if they could bring in some talents to Crimson City. For this matter, the intelligence department had also tried, but the skilled workers were all restricted by the local masters. That place wasn't Yang Xie's territory, so it was very difficult to get all these people away without anyone noticing. This was a perfect opportunity to bring in talents, while also dealing a blow to the Southern Ming Empire. Once the Southern Ming Empire lost the advantage of silk, porcelain, and tea leaves, Yang Xie would have a better chance of winning against the Southern Ming Empire. This matter needs to be reported to His Majesty before he can make a decision. Kuang Yi didn't immediately agree. Instead, he said that he needed to report it first. Yang Chendong could understand that Kuang Yi couldn't make a decision on such a big matter. Thus, he nodded in tacit agreement. Then he raised a second request, which was to ask for people. This time, Zhu Huiyan attacked the shelter without any reason. Not only did thousands of soldiers die, but 40,000 civilians also ran away. This matter had to be mentioned. Thus, not only did the Southern Ming Empire have to admit it, they also had to compensate the 40,000 people. After hearing this, Kuang Yi frowned and said, "Okay, this old man will also report this matter to His Majesty." He didn't expect Zong to agree at all, but Yang Chendong still said it. He just wanted to give him a heads up. After all, Zhu Qizhen used to be great Ming Zong. Even if he agreed in his heart, he wouldn't say it out loud. After knowing this, Yang Chendong didn't place his hopes on the Southern Ming Empire. Instead, he placed it on Zhu Huiyan. Some things couldn't be handled by a county official. Yang Chendong then found the detained Chen Tian. Different from Kuang Yi, he maintained a serious gaze. He even called a few teachers in front of Kuang Yi and ordered them to prepare for battle. They were to leave Linshan City and head north at any time. Chen Tian didn't hide any of this from him. After the teachers left the hall, he naturally yelled, "King Nanwu, what are you doing? Must you become enemies with our King Guangtong?" "Wrong, if it wasn't for this king becoming enemies with you. It was you who became enemies with us first." Yang Chendong turned around and angrily rebuked Chen Tian. "Yes, we sent troops to attack your shelter first, but we didn't gain anything. Furthermore, even if we did something wrong, we can make up for it. Didn't I come this time to listen to your requests and conditions? What's the meaning of sending troops without talking about anything?" Chen Tian yelled. It could be seen that he was truly anxious this time. It could be seen that not only him, but even his master, King Guangtong, didn't want to become enemies with the Five-Star Army again. Previously, Zhu Huiyan attacked the Five-Star Army because he wanted to use this method to show everyone his strength. Now he had suffered losses against the Five-Star Army. He had even almost destroyed one of the enemy's cavalry divisions. However, to be able to make the Five-Star Army suffer losses like this was not something an ordinary person could do. Just from this point alone, Zhu Huiyan's goal had been achieved. He had also successfully received the Southern Ming Empire's amnesty. Since all of his goals had been achieved, there was naturally no need to continue fighting. If he won, no one would say anything, but if he lost, he would only feel bad. Zhu Huiyan knew this, so he sent the most eloquent person, Chen Tian, over. He only had one request, which was for the Five-Star Army to stop fighting. As for whether the other party would raise any requests or conditions, as long as they weren't too excessive, he would agree. After all, he wanted to step on the 5-star army to climb up. You said that we can talk. All right, then I'll give you a chance to talk. If you can't satisfy me, then there won't be a chance to talk. Yang Chendong spoke as if there was only one chance, and he wanted them to grasp it seriously. The 5 divisions and close to 100,000 soldiers finally arrived at Linchin City. At this point, Yang Chendong had over 100,000 soldiers. He indeed had the qualifications to cause a ruckus in the southern Ming Empire's territory. However, these 100,000 soldiers didn't take a step forward, nor did they have any intentions of attacking. This was all because the negotiations were going smoothly. Chen Tian was very tactful. He clearly agreed to all of Yang Chendong's requests. However, this matter was very important, so he had to report it to Zhu Huiyan. Chapter 1066. Kuang Yi and Chen Tian both stayed in Linchin City. Only their trusted aides left the city to inform the higher-ups of Yang Chendong's request. Linchin City regained its usual peace. A few days later, news of the little southern Ming prince and Yangzhong prince being captured in the Guizhou division was spread. At this point, the little southern Ming army was disbanded. Under the leadership of General Meng Neng, their army joined the 3rd province Prince Zhu Huizhou's army. Meng Neng brought over 300,000 troops. Adding on Zhu Huizhou's original army, even without the 100,000 from the Bangladesh army, he still had 500,000 troops. Young master, this? After Beta Persei received the news, he looked worriedly at Yang Chendong. What are you afraid of? 500,000 isn't a small number, but with 3 provinces, how many troops do you think he can transfer to Linchin City? Or how many troops would he need to deal with us? After Yang Chendong asked 2 questions in a row, he smiled and patted Beta Persei's shoulder. Don't worry, the plan won't change. Yang Chendong was indeed full of confidence. He predicted that Zhu Huizhou wouldn't make an enemy out of the 5-star army. After all, the time to prove his strength had passed. Now that he had been recruited as the 3rd province prince, there was no need to create more problems. If they really fought, Zhu Huizhou didn't have the confidence to win. Not to mention, there was one more thing that he didn't mention. Yao Yingjun had taken Zhu Lian and escaped from the Guizhou department. Not only that, they had also created an army of 50,000 people and were currently fighting for territory in the 3 provinces. Speaking of which, this was out of Yang Chendong's expectations. Yao Yingjun was a chess piece he placed in the little southern Ming prince's faction. Now that this faction was destroyed, he had completed his mission. Yao Yingjun thought the same. He even wanted to bring Princess Yingjun out and find a safe place in Yangxia, so that she could live the rest of her life without worries. Who would have thought that at this time, a woman would actually show that she was not inferior to men? After learning that her 2nd brother had betrayed her and her eldest brother and 3rd brother had been captured, she actually took up the responsibility. Moreover, she really allowed him to persuade some of the small South Ming soldiers outside of the Guizhou division to rebuild the mountain. When this matter was reported to Yang Chendong through the intelligence network, he was also surprised for a while. Thinking about it, this was a good thing. He didn't have to pay a price to make his opponent restless, so why not? Yang Chendong agreed and sent someone to inform Yao Yingjun that if things did not go well, he could still bring Princess Yongxing to the Langshan shelter. At the same time, he also told him that if he needed financial support, he could ask. With all of this, Yang Chendong was sure that Zhu Huizhou, who seemed to be very powerful, would not make an enemy out of the 5-star army. Things developed as he expected. When the people sent by Chen Tian met with the 3 provincial kings and told them about Yang Chendong's request, the 3 provincial kings who tried to assassinate his brother quickly agreed to all of the conditions. Zhu Huizhou agreed to Yang Chendong's request and recognized the legitimacy of the shelter. As long as any Han citizen went there, regardless of their status, they wouldn't pursue the matter. Not only that, every year, he would provide 200,000 Han citizens to the shelter as compensation for attacking the 5-star army. In exchange, Crimson City's goods could be provided to Zhu Huihua at the same price as other merchants. Originally, Yang Chendong wanted to provide 500,000 people a year, but Chen Tian refused. In his words, 200,000 was already a lot. At most, the 3 provinces wouldn't have enough Han citizens, and they could just grab some from the nearby southern Ming province. However, 500,000 a year, they wouldn't be able to catch that many. Actually, 200,000 a year was already enough to satisfy Yang Chendong. Originally, he was just asking for an exorbitant price, waiting for the other party to bargain. Giving 30 to 50,000 people a year was already what he had expected. Now 200,000 a year was already a pleasant surprise. Not long after, the southern Ming Emperor Zhu Qizhen also agreed. After discussing with the court officials, they finally agreed to sell the silk, tea leaves, and porcelain to the 5-star army. This was something that couldn't be helped. Many areas in the south of the southern Ming Empire had already been occupied by the 5-star army. If they didn't agree, they wouldn't be able to sell these things for money. As for those skilled workers, since when did the great Ming Empire value craftsmen? If they were gone, they could just nurture them again. Thus they all agreed. The negotiations with the 2 sides went very smoothly, reaching Yang Chendong's expectations. After the negotiations were completed, Yang Chendong knew that he had to leave this place. Even Linchin City and Siming residents had to be given up. These were the bargaining chips in the negotiations. Retreat. Since he had achieved his goal, Yang Chendong gave the order to retreat. Hundreds of thousands of 5-star army escorted the 40,000 prisoners out of Linchin City. At this time, the battle ended and everything returned to normal. However, any smart person could tell that this wasn't the end. Once the 2 sides started fighting again, they wouldn't stop until one side was dead. The 5-star army finally retreated, leaving behind Linchin City and Siming residents. At the same time, Zhu Huiying also left behind 2 opponents, Everlasting Victory Princess and Sheeping King's army. Everlasting Victory Princess didn't need to be mentioned. When Zhu Huiying made his move, he didn't plan to let this sister go. As for Sheeping King, he was originally the king of Yunnan. Now that the 3 provincial kings wanted to replace him, how could he agree? Of course, he had to find some trouble. Zhu Qizhen didn't think highly of the 3 provincial kings, but he had to agree to reduce internal friction. Now that Sheeping King was willing to fight with Zhu Huiying, he was happy to see it happen. He didn't say anything and just let them fight. After Yang Chendong left southern Ming's territory, he didn't pay attention to it anymore. Yang Xie's territory was so big that there were too many things for him to worry about. For example, there was a piece of information in front of him about the Baiming army. The telegram was sent by the commander of the First Army, Tiger's Man. It only said one thing. The Baiming army had a 50,000-man cavalry. They were all soldiers from the Liaodong region, and were nicknamed the Liaodong Iron Cavalry. Under the leadership of General Fang Dingshan, they were training in the grasslands. They constantly clashed with the small Mongolian tribes, and sometimes provoked Yeshen and Walla. They won and lost. According to Tiger's Man's telegram, the 50,000-man Liaodong Iron Cavalry followed the policy of training soldiers through battles. Fang Dingshan used to be the commander of Zhu Qiyu's imperial bodyguards. He was quite trusted and was given a lot of freedom on this expedition. Since their appearance, the Baiming army's banner became famous in the grasslands and had a certain amount of influence. They're all restless people. Yang Chendong sighed, and then looked at another telegram. It was sent by the Internal Intelligence Department of the Japanese Empire. The internal strife there had already begun, and some places had already broken out of the control of the emperor and the great general's office. In other words, it wouldn't be long before the Japanese Empire's affairs had to be resolved. Thinking about Princess Junko, who had returned more than a year ago, Yang Chendong looked in the direction of the Japanese Empire and said to himself, "Don't let anything happen to you. Otherwise, a lot of people will be buried with you." January 1457 AD. Yang Chendong returned to Qiqian City and prepared to spend the new year here. At the same time, he accompanied his wife, Hu Yan, to wait for her delivery. On the 7th day of the 2nd lunar month, on this seemingly ordinary day, a baby boy was born. When Yang Chendong was 20 years old, he finally had his first son, named Yang Bo Bugnam of Gojoseon finally had a son. and there was someone to inherit the family name. Naturally, it was a great day for the entire Wuxia. Qiqian City was immediately decorated, and it was even more lively than the new year. The various provinces and regions under the Yang faction also sent representatives to the city with gifts to celebrate and express their joy. Good things come in pairs. On the third day after Yangbo was born, King Abu Burkle of the Great F country announced his surrender in Cotton Orchid Island. After more than half a year of siege, the city was already in chaos. Originally, Abu Burkle wanted to continue supporting because he still had soldiers and food in his hands. However, the people had already had enough of these days of fear. Under the instigation of the intelligence department in the city, they rushed into the city and surrounded the palace. The power of the people was great, especially when it came to their own safety. Often, they could exert unimaginable power. Facing the flood of people, the soldiers of the Great F country did not stop them. In the end, Abu Burkle was captured. The city gate was opened and he was sent to the cold front navy that surrounded the city. With the capture of Abu Burkle, the fall of the Great F country was announced, and the entire Luzon Island was unified. At this point, the Great F country and the original Sulu country were all under Yangxia's control. Yangxia also gained more than 6 million people, and its strength increased by a large margin. In more than a year, Siam and the Great F country were divided. With more than 10 million people, Yangxia's strength was evident. However, this time, Yang Chendong only moved the 6 million people in Siam's current Tai province. Half of the 3 million people were moved to other provinces. The 6 million people in Luzon Island were not moved. They were reserved for the next move to the Japanese Empire. At that time, 5 million people would be sent to the Japanese Empire. Yes, Yang Chendong had raised his butcher's knife. The next target of his plan was the Japanese Empire. The reason why he said it was a plan was because Yang Chendong could not guarantee that there would not be other accidents. For example, the sudden appearance of the 50,000 Liaodong Iron Cavalry in Baiming was an accident. According to the report of the new army commander, Tiger's Mane, this Iron Cavalry was very arrogant on the grassland. Not only did they have the opportunity to clash with the Walla Iron Cavalry, but they also occasionally encountered caravans that traded with the first city. Although they could not kill and rob, they still had to pay for the passage. Chapter 1067. Perhaps it was because the Liaodong Iron Cavalry was short of money, or perhaps they didn't want to provoke a powerful existence like the 5-star army right away. But even if they didn't kill anyone, they just wanted money, which made some caravans that cooperated with the first city suffer. During this time, many merchants came to the door and complained to Tiger's Man. According to them, they would rather give the money to the 5-star army than to the Liaodong Iron Cavalry. The appearance of the Liaodong Iron Cavalry greatly changed many people's view of Baiming. Is this still the army of the Great Ming Dynasty? Why are they so barbaric? How are they different from the bandits on the grassland? Are they still the grass-eating Han Chinese? Previously, there was the 5-star army, and now there was Baiming's Liaodong Iron Cavalry. What changed them? For this matter, Tiger's Man sent a telegram to Yang Chendong more than once, asking if he wanted to attack them. After all, one mountain couldn't accommodate 2 tigers. It was enough to have the 5-star army on the grassland. Yang Chendong suppressed Tiger's Man's intention to attack. He now had a target to conquer, the Japanese Empire. This was a country with a population of more than 10 million people. If he wanted to conquer them, the preparation work must be very thorough. The people of the Japanese Empire were very fertile. This could be seen from their names, such as Dairo, Ero Saburo. There were even 7 and 8 Dairo. This might have something to do with the environment they lived in and their development over the years. It was very easy for each region to be independent. Sometimes, even 2 counties that were very close to each other would see each other as fire and water, and would fight with each other. At that time, whoever had more people would often have the advantage. For a country with such a large population, Yang Chendong must be well prepared. He couldn't afford to be distracted. Not to mention that in his heart, it was difficult to divide the world into 2 for a long time. and the tripartite balance was the most stable. The existence of Baiming, Southern Ming, and himself was the tripartite balance, which could ensure that any side would have to be wary of the other side when they attacked. While rejecting Tiger's Man's idea of attacking on the grassland, he also asked him to prepare the new army that had been formed for a year to be transferred to North Korea. In addition to preparing for an attack on the Japanese Empire, Yang Qindong also called the city lord Yuqian and other important people in the palace to discuss the introduction of paper money. The introduction of paper money was not Yang Qindong's creation. At the beginning of the Ming dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang implemented the paper money policy and issued the Ming dynasty's precious banknotes and copper coins. However, the Great Ming dynasty's banknotes did not have a limit and there was no reserve, which quickly led to inflation. Now the Great Ming dynasty's banknotes were restricted in the market. Although they were still circulating, their purchasing power was very limited, especially after the sudden rise of Yang Qindong. Regardless of whether it was the Northern Ming or the Southern Ming, in order to achieve their goals, they vigorously printed the Great Ming banknote, which directly caused the market to become chaotic. At the same time, this item depreciated even more, and there were very few people who recognized it. With this example, Yang Qindong obviously wouldn't let the same mistake happen to him. This time, not only did he want the paper money to be successful, but it also had to be strong for a long time. For this, he ordered people to vigorously develop the gold mines found on the island of Dafei as reserves. He was preparing to introduce the paper money into the market. First, it has to be anti-counterfeiting. Second, it has to be advertised properly. Third, and most important, is that it can't be casually published. The amount of reserves can only be printed to achieve the same value as gold and silver. Yang Qindong said to City Lord Yuqian and the people in charge of the Yang family's bank with a serious expression. After all, the circulation of gold and silver was a bit too costly. In the long run, the people who would suffer losses would be the country and the people. It could be said that the paper money was a very necessary thing. After handing over the issue of the paper money to professionals, Yang Qindong started to mobilize the troops. This time, he was preparing to deal with the Japanese Empire. He was preparing to bring 150,000 soldiers. This could be said to be the largest number of soldiers he had ever brought. Among them, the 1st Cavalry Division was already making preparations to be mobilized. There was also the 1st Cavalry Division that must be brought along. This was a very elite force. With them, many things would be done with half the effort. Then there was the C4th Division, the C5th Division, the 1st Reserve Division, the 1st Division, the 2nd Division, and the 3rd Division. In total, there were close to 150,000 people. Not only were the troops ready to assemble in North Korea, Yang Qindong was also preparing 6 million people to go to the Japanese Empire. For example, Luzon Island had to prepare 5 million people, and even the provinces and regions had to prepare 1 million people. This was the preparation to uproot the entire country. At the same time, Yang Qindong took the opportunity to inspect some of the important industries in Qiqian City. Yang Qindong paid special attention to the munitions factory. 2 years ago, he had brought out a Type 99 tank from the warehouse and placed it in the factory. Now that so much time had passed, he wanted to know how the imitation work was going. Imitation was one of Yang Xie's main policies for industrial development. First, there would be a finished product and a method. Then he would try to learn how to do it. Only then would he be able to walk his own path. It was just like how many products and firearms were made. The Han people, who had 5,000 years of history, had never lacked intelligent people. However, this time, Yang Qindong was somewhat disappointed. There was simply too much information and knowledge involved in the creation of a tank. Even though there was already a finished product in front of everyone, they had never seen how it was used. Under the circumstances of how it was used, there was no way to imitate it even if they wanted to. Therefore, this time, Yang Qindong came to the munitions factory to demonstrate how to use the tank. Clear the area. Except for the necessary relevant researchers and the main leaders of the munitions factory, everyone else was cleared out of the area. Then, Yang Qindong walked into the big iron tool, with a tank hat on his head. Under everyone's gaze, the tank that was filled with fuel started moving. With a roar, it walked out of the secret workshop and appeared in the empty field. This scene was too much of a shock to everyone. The roaring sound had already frightened everyone. When they saw that this thing could already move under the control of a single person, everyone present widened their eyes and looked like they had been shocked silly. Then, an even more shocking scene appeared. After the tank arrived at the field, it first moved quickly and skillfully turned. Along the way, it knocked down many obstacles that had been prepared beforehand. Then it stood still and fired at an area that had been marked out long ago. In the roar of the explosion, the target area a few miles away was hit, and smoke rose from it. Plop! This eye-popping scene attracted everyone present to kneel. Even the city lord Wuxia, who accompanied Yang Chendong to watch, and Yang Er, who had been following Yang Chendong for many years and had long been accustomed to various miracles, also knelt on the ground. Yang Chendong was very powerful. He was once called the Lord God, as if he was a god that had descended to earth. But even if they were fully prepared, the moment they saw the shell fired, everyone was still shocked and knelt on the ground. They didn't dare to imagine. If this iron tool were to be used on a large scale, once it appeared on the battlefield, who would have the ability to stop it? They were afraid that when the time came, it would only be a rush, and the thousands of soldiers and horses would be scared silly and scattered. When everyone knelt on the ground, the tank extinguished the fire and stopped. Yang Chendong, with a tank hat on his head, got out of the cockpit. His appearance here attracted loud shouts that shook the heavens and the earth. If one listened carefully, they would hear the three lords of God talking nonstop. Well, this thing is somewhat magical, but it's more of a function of technology. So you choose two people, and I'll teach them how to drive and operate it. When Yang Chendong's voice resounded in the training ground, for these two places, the people below could be said to be red in the face and ears. They all wanted to feel the power of this iron tool, and they all wanted to be in close contact with the divine object. For a full 10 days, except for going back to the palace to visit his son and daughter at night, Yang Chendong stayed in the training ground most of the time. And this place had been taken over by Longwei. No one was allowed to approach without orders, or they had the right to act first and report later. It was precisely because they had seen the power of the tank that Longwei believed that any level of defense was appropriate. In 10 days, the two disciples taught by Yang Chendong had barely finished their apprenticeship. Next, they could only rely on continuous practice to reach the level of familiarity. After that, Yang Chendong left the training ground and returned to the palace. There was news from the Japanese Empire that internal strife had begun, and now it was already April 1457. Back to half a month ago, in the Japanese Empire's capital, Pingan, Beijing, Princess Junko, who had returned to the Japanese Empire for 2 years, made use of her strengths and established a school called Jinxing Academy. She widely accepted students and taught advanced knowledge, which was constantly expanding its influence. When Jinxing Academy was first established, it didn't attract much attention. On the contrary, it attracted people's ridicule. In the Japanese Empire, the status of women was naturally subordinate to men. They often believed more than China that a woman without talent was virtuous. It was not surprising that Junko was a princess. Fortunately, Junko's actions received the support of the emperor, who was also his father, the Garden Emperor. There was no other way. His son, Chenin, was only 15 years old, and Junko, who was already 20 years old, naturally became the person that the emperor valued. Speaking of which, the emperor only had a good name, but his life was not easy. In the history of the Japanese Empire, since the end of the Heian period, the emperor, who originally had absolute control over the Japanese Empire, began to lose his power. In 1192 AD, Minamoto no Yoritamo established the Kamakura shogunate, and the emperor began to fall and became a puppet of the Kamakura shogunate. Later in history, the emperor became a puppet of the Muromachi shogunate. The emperor became a puppet of the shogunate for more than 600 years. Not only did he not have any real power, but sometimes even his basic necessities, such as food, shelter, and transportation and holding ceremonies, had problems due to financial constraints. The most typical example was the 103rd generation emperor, Hoto Miyamoto. He was Junko's younger brother. Chapter 1068. Emperor Hutu was born in 1442 AD. His name was Chungren, and he was the eldest son of the 102nd emperor of the Chrysanthemum dynasty. His mother was the queen of the emperor of the Chrysanthemum dynasty, Fujiwara. When Emperor Hutu was born, the situation of the imperial court in Kyoto was terrible. First, the real power was in the hands of the Shitachi shogunate, and the emperor was a puppet. Second, the national treasury could not make ends meet, and it was not even enough to pay the salaries of the imperial court officials, let alone meet the expenses of the imperial court. Therefore, even though Emperor Hutu was born in the imperial court, he sometimes did not even have enough food and clothing. Even the wedding ceremony of marrying Princess Tingtian was held hastily. In history, the emperor of the Chrysanthemum dynasty abdicated and became the supreme emperor. The 22-year-old Emperor Hutu inherited the throne and became the 103rd emperor of the Chrysanthemum dynasty. Princess Tingtian then became the empress. However, due to the tight financial situation, the imperial court in Kyoto held a very shabby ceremony to save money. Even after he died, because he did not have the money to bury him, his corpse was frozen in the imperial palace for 2 months. Some officials had to raise money to bury him. From this situation, one could imagine the status of the emperor. This was the main reason why they were willing to spend a lot of money to buy the cannons from the 5-star army. It was because the military and political power was controlled by General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. If he did not die, the imperial family would never be able to rise up. However, Ashikaga Yoshimasa's whereabouts were uncertain. No one knew when he went in and out of the general's house. The emperor only bought 1 cannon and 2 bullets from the 5-star army, so he did not dare to take the risk. Since his daughter was willing to come out and do something, the emperor would definitely support her. It was this Zhenqing Academy that no one thought highly of. After 2 years of development, they could not recruit any students. But now, there were people who were willing to take the initiative to learn. They could not satisfy the 50 students they taught at one time, which attracted the attention of other forces. General Ashikaga Yoshimasa was one of them. First, he sent people to catch the former student. After some investigation, he found that the former student was extraordinarily talented. However, he was just the most ordinary student in the first batch of students in Zhenqing Academy, but he had such a great change, which attracted the attention of the general. Since she is capable, beautiful, and a princess, then let's marry her. General Ashikaga Yoshimasa said to his subordinates. Soon, the news that the general wanted to marry Princess Junko spread among the higher-ups. Some abilities should be used. This was the attitude of the strong to the weak. Maybe he wanted Junko to work for him, or maybe he just wanted to marry Junko and throw her at home as a concubine and live a peaceful life. But no matter what the result was, the emperor's power of the emperor. Of course, Junko wouldn't agree to it. She went to the emperor and expressed her determination that she would rather die. How could the emperor did not know his daughters? But what could he? He didn't have much military power, and he didn't have any political partners. He couldn't win. Just when the emperor was at his wits' end and Junko was about to commit suicide, a savior appeared. Oda Nagamasa was a powerful general in the capital of Pinyin. He was also the only collaborator that the emperor had managed to rope in over the years. He proposed that he could agree to the Supreme General's request, but before the wedding he wanted to meet the Supreme General to discuss some details. The location of the meeting was set at the Supreme General's mansion. The military system of the Japanese Empire was divided from the bottom to the top. It was divided into soldiers, infantry captains in charge of 100 people, infantry captains in charge of 500 people, elders in charge of 1,000 people, generals in charge of 2,000 people, magistrates in charge of 10,000 people, chiefs in charge of 20,000 people, daimyo in charge of 50,000 people, generals in charge of 60,000 to 80,000 people, generals in charge of 60,000 to 80,000 people, and the emperor at the top. Oda Nagamasa was one of the generals with real power under General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. He had more than 70,000 soldiers. He came up with this idea to kill the general and replace him. Before, he couldn't find a chance to attack Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Why not use this opportunity to trick him into coming to the general's mansion, and then kill him in one fell swoop? In this way, Oda Nagamasa could replace him, and the emperor's power could be restored to a certain extent. This idea was quickly supported by the emperor and Princess Junko. This was their reply to the great general, and the great general agreed without hesitation. There had been news about the imperial family purchasing a cannon from the Five Stars Palace. But after so many years there was no news about it, and it gradually faded away. Even General Ashikaga Yoshimasa thought it was fake news. It was precisely because of this that the general politely agreed. He thought that the royal family wanted to save face, so he would give them face. In the future, when Junko became his woman, wouldn't he be able to bully her however he wanted? With a good start, the plan was carried out smoothly. The day before the agreed meeting, the Type 59-1 130mm cannon that he had spent 10 million taels of silver to buy finally took off its disguise after being covered in dust for many years. Furthermore, the only 2 cannonballs were also taken out. In order to ensure that nothing would go wrong, after the first shot was fired, the second shot had to be promptly followed up. The 5-star army had already adjusted the target, and the target was the general's mansion. No one dared to touch it in these years, and now it was finally the time to use it. This matter made the emperor, Junko, and Oda Nagamasa become very excited. After a long night of waiting, dawn finally came. When the time of the meeting was getting closer and closer, the emperor and the others held their breath. They were about to witness a miracle, a scene that changed history. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the 2 sides agreed to meet at the general's mansion. The shell was put into the Type 59-1 130mm cannon, and then a deafening sound was heard. The shell arc across the sky went straight into the general's mansion, causing a shocking feeling like an earthquake. It hit. The soldiers of the Japanese Empire, who fired the cannon, shouted excitedly, "Isn't there still one more shell? Fire it again." General Oda Nagamasa said excitedly. He was afraid that Ashikaga Yoshimasa wouldn't die. He didn't believe that the general wouldn't die after firing 2 shells. Under the attack of the 2 powerful cannons, the entire general's mansion was covered. Even if the area of the mansion was not small, more than 70% of the area was killed. Especially the main building was destroyed. As long as Ashikaga Yoshimasa stayed in the general's mansion, his fate was almost set in stone. In the imperial palace, you could even see the fire and smoke coming from the general's mansion. This scene made the emperor, Junko, and Oda Nagamasa very excited. They were shocked by the power of the cannons, and they were also excited that the situation in the Japanese Empire would soon change. The situation had indeed changed, but the General Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't die. It wasn't because he was smart enough to see through everything. The problem lay with Oda Nagamasa. His most trusted deputy, Kayome Sakuki, suddenly betrayed him and told the Supreme Shogun about the plan. At the last moment, they escaped from the mansion and avoided a fatal disaster. When Oda Nagamasa heard the news, he saw the general's army outside the imperial palace. Fortunately, in order to celebrate the victory and successfully seize military power, Oda Nagamasa had transferred tens of thousands of his own soldiers to guard the palace. Now they were finally put to good use. Hold on. At the same time, Oda Nagamasa was also preparing to break out of the imperial palace. In his view, even if Ashikaga Yoshimasa didn't die, Ping and Beijing wasn't a place where he could live for a long time. As for whether he needed to take the emperor and his family with him when he left, don't be ridiculous, it was already difficult to protect himself. Who would think about other things? Oda Nagamasa wanted to escape. Once he left, it could be imagined that the Supreme General's anger would definitely be vented on the emperor. If that was the case, although they might not die, it would be far worse and more painful than death. So leaving the imperial palace was a must. General Oda, please take us with you. The emperor didn't care about his face and lowered his noble head. Yes. Oda Nagamasa wanted to refuse. But Princess Junko said, "General, I have a very good relationship with the leader of the 5-star army. As long as you can take us away, I will send someone to contact them and ask for their support to deal with Ashikaga Yoshimasa. By the way, the leader is my teacher." As if she was afraid that Oda Nagamasa would refuse, Junko added a master and apprentice as a bargaining chip. Everyone in the Japanese Empire knew that the Han people attached great importance to the relationship between master and apprentice. This sentence made Oda Nagamasa, who was about to refuse, change his attitude. He could indeed escape and even take the emperor's family with him. However, if he did so, he would only draw the great general's anger onto himself. With his 70,000 soldiers, there was no way he could stop the great general. So he wanted to keep the emperor and his family to attract the general's attention and anger. But at the same time, he knew even more clearly that even if he managed to escape this time, it would be impossible for him to regain his power. It was even very likely that he would become an existence that everyone wanted to kill. He had no idea how long he could last. But now it was completely different. If he could get the help of the 5-star army, the situation would be reversed. If you don't believe it, just look at the power of the 2 cannons. Oda Nagamasa's eyes rolled for a moment. He originally wanted to say sorry, but now he said, "Yes, the emperor's safety is more important than anything else. I will take you away." Chapter 1069. Later, when the great general's soldiers entered the palace, they had already disappeared. Only the 59 to 130 mm cannon, that was still a little warm, could be seen at the back of the palace. Take care of this thing. This is the evidence that the 5-star army wants to persecute this great general. I will go back and ask them for an explanation. Great General Ashikaga Yoshimasa's face flashed with anger. There were often ships of the 5-star army near the Wa Island. Usually they also exchanged business, so their relationship was quite good. But this time, they wanted to use other people's hands to take his life. This was something he couldn't tolerate. He decided to take advantage of this matter and blackmail the 5-star army. It was clear that the navy of the Japanese Empire also had some strength. Ashikaga Yoshimasa was obviously too arrogant. He thought that the 5-star army would be afraid of him. But he didn't know that at this moment, the 5-star army was mobilizing. The source of all the information came from the head of the security bureau in the Japanese Empire. He said that a civil war was imminent, and that they should be prepared. Before the new year, Yang Chendong received the information that the internal relations of the Japanese Empire were tense, and some places had already had internal strife. Since then he had been making all kinds of preparations. Yang Xie's powerful machine began to move. The soldiers, provisions, and people who wanted to migrate were all moving. Now that there was finally definite news, how could he let go of such an opportunity? Although Yang Chendong didn't know if the emperor's faction would kill the general the day before, in his opinion, no matter who won or lost, it would be beneficial to him. This was a move he was going to make. Ashikaga Yoshimasa took the emperor and some of his confidants and left Ping in Beijing. As he wished, Junko sent her trusted Kobayashi, who was her bodyguard when she was in the Great Ming Dynasty. She asked him to leave the army and get a ship to the nearby North Korea to report to the 5-star army for help. After doing this, she followed her imperial father, the empress, her younger brother, and other members of the imperial family to the south under the protection of Oda Nagamasa, and entered the Shanin Road's Onion area. Xiao Lin found a boat by the sea and came to North Korea. It was already more than 10 days later when he reported to Yang Chendong. Holding the telegram from North Korea in his hand, he didn't look too surprised. However, the cannon did not kill Ashikaga Yoshimasa. This would make it more difficult for him to conquer the Japanese Empire. Fortunately, he had never thought that such a powerful figure would die so easily, so he had already made sufficient preparations. Yang Chendong put the telegram aside and gave the order to Beta Persei, who was following beside him. Order Longwei to get ready to depart. We'll sail to Korea in 2 days. With horses they were called Haiki, and without horses, they were called Longwei. This was an extremely elite, well-equipped, and particularly combat-capable army. They were also the strongest protection around Yang Chendong. Often, wherever they appeared, it meant that Yang Chendong would also appear there. There were only 2 days to prepare, but for an elite army, the time was more than enough. The reason why Yang Chendong left 2 days to make arrangements was that he wanted to take a good look at his son and daughter. His son Yangbo was still too young. Instead of looking at him, it was better to look at his mother, Hu Yan. He talked about his next itinerary and apologized. As the first madam and Yang Chendong's legal wife, Hu Yan was originally a kind and virtuous woman. Although she was very worried, she didn't blame him at all. Instead, she advised Yang Chendong to be careful. She also said that the next time he came back, little Bo should be able to run all over the place. After leaving Hu Yan's palace, Yang Chendong went to see his daughter Lele. In contrast, she was much cuter. As soon as she saw Yang Chendong, she hugged his neck like a wombat and didn't want to come down. She kept calling him father. Yang Chendong also liked Lele very much. He even specially created a song for her. The king brought me to patrol the mountains, saying that she was his little princess. Logically speaking, with his current status, it was really degrading for him to touch and play with these songs. But when did he ever put these customs in his eyes? Just based on this matter, it attracted the envy of many people. The attitude of the servants in the palace towards Lele became more friendly and respectful. Wuxia also had many similarities with other dynasties. For example, the people below were also very understanding. Whoever was favored would be more popular. Fortunately, Yang Chendong also treated the other madams very well. At least he did his best to treat them equally. In addition, Hu Yan, as the legal wife of the princess consort, had no intention of suppressing any of her younger sisters. This allowed the palace to appear to be harmonious. Even if there were some disputes, no one would show it on the surface. Whether the backyard was stable or not was directly related to the situation on the front line. Seeing that the backyard was fine, 2 days later, Yang Chendong took the last 1,000 long way to leave on the transport ship and went straight to North Korea. At this time, the Japanese Empire had already started a war, especially in the Anyun area. The army sent by the great general Ashikaga Yoshimasa had already fought with Oda Nagamasa's army. Ashikaga Yoshimasa's reason was dignified. He said that someone had kidnapped the royal family, and he came to rescue them. Oda Nagamasa was also not incompetent. He held the emperor hostage and ordered his vassals. He said that someone wanted to rebel, and he was protecting the emperor. He also asked others to do the same as him, to make their own efforts and contributions to protect the royal family and the emperor. Everyone said that they were right, and everyone said that they were righteous. The two groups of people fought together. The other forces of the Japanese Empire that received the news didn't intervene. If they rashly acted without seeing the result, it was very likely that they would become cannon fodder. No one who could become the leader of a force was a fool. When Yang Chendong arrived in North Korea nearly 20 days later, the situation in the Japanese Empire was already very critical. From the feedback of the intelligence department, it was obvious that the great general's side had the advantage. He had always been in charge of the military and political power of the whole country. Oda Nagamasa was just one of the vassals. Naturally, their strength was not equal. It seemed that he couldn't hold on any longer. The governor of North Korea province, Zhang Yi, had already done the logistics work for the army. Some of the people who came here first were also properly settled by him. When the 5-star army entered the territory of the Japanese Empire and stood firm, he would immediately send people to make sure that they occupied a place. This was to ensure that they didn't go back and forth and didn't cause extra trouble for the army. Yang Chendong praised Governor Zhang Ye's work. Then he called a group of military generals and pointed at Tsushima Island in the Japanese Empire's terrain on the sand table. He said, "This will be our primary target. Commander Su, I will give this task to your army. Is there any problem?" I promised to complete the task. The new army's commander, Su He, stood at attention and replied confidently. The new army was an army that had just been established. However, it had been more than a year since the establishment of the army. The personnel structure was already very complete, especially the commander, Su He, who was originally a general. Since he was captured by Yang Qindong, he had repeatedly made contributions to the army. Under the leadership of such a strong general, the combat power of the new army had been constantly improving. What they lacked now was actual combat experience. It was because of this that Yang Qindong transferred the new army to the front line this time. It was to give them a good opportunity to fight. In Yang Qindong's eyes, the Japanese Empire was not worthy of being called a big enemy. His real enemy was still the grassland. Su He took the position of the vanguard, which made the other division commanders envious. However, they were just envious. No one dared to disobey the orders of the sixth young master. Besides, the Japanese Empire was also one of the big countries. If they wanted to completely occupy this place, they would have to fight a lot of battles. Everyone was ready to fight. After the order was issued, 2 hours after the meeting, a large number of ships belonging to the 5-star army began to set off. They set off from Pusan, the southernmost part of North Korea, and went straight to Tsushima Island, which was hundreds of nautical miles away. Tsushima Island belonged to the West Hokkaido area of the Japanese Empire. The chief in charge of guarding this place was called Fukushima Nagashi. He had 20,000 soldiers and nearly 100 warships in his hands. It was a well-known force. Because they fought by the sea all year round, this army was very mobile. If they couldn't win, they could just board the ship and escape to the sea. With this, even the orders of the Supreme General Ashikaga Yoshimasa were not completely effective here. Fukushima Nagashi was also paying attention to the Battle of Anyun, but in his view, it was just an internal strife for benefits. To put it bluntly, it was a dog-eat-dog fight. No matter who won in the end, it had nothing to do with him. So during this period of time, his days were very leisurely, and he was just a good spectator watching the show. Suddenly, one day, a large number of naval forces flying the flag of the 5-star army appeared around Tsushima Island. As soon as they appeared, they surrounded the island in all directions, not leaving a single gap. This situation really scared the Fukushima chief, who had been on the battlefield for a long time. The ones surrounding the island were the C4 and C5 divisions responsible for transporting the new army soldiers. In their eyes, their navy would play a big role in attacking the Japanese Empire. Just like now, no matter who was the vanguard, in the end, the navy would be the first to act. Fire the cannons. The 2 Cold Front Division commanders gave the order almost at the same time. Hundreds of cannons installed in the ships were fired at the Japanese Empire's ships. There were less than 100 ships. Facing the attack of 2 elite Cold Front Division commanders, there was no way they could resist. As the ships of the Japanese Empire were sunk or hit, the remaining ships of the Japanese Empire quickly retreated, heading towards the depths of Tsushima Island. Haha, it's up to our new army now. Pass down the order, prepare to land. Su He said excitedly. He was afraid that the 2 Cold Front Division commanders would fire directly into the depths of Tsushima Island. If that happened, he wouldn't live up to his name as the vanguard. Fortunately, these people knew how to endure, and gave him the opportunity to attack. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.